I am Brenda, 33 years old, and my uncle owns a luxury cruise line down in Miami. Yesterday afternoon, he called me with a simple question that completely stopped my heart. He asked if my husband was home. I laughed and told him, yes, my husband is upstairs right now, working on a massive project. My uncle went dead silent. Then he said, Brenda, that is impossible because I am looking at him right now, and he is checking into my ship with your sister. Before I could even process his words, I heard the heavy thud of my front door opening behind me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust broken by the people you loved the most. As an internal auditor for a major financial firm, my entire life is built around facts, data, and irrefutable evidence. I do not deal in rumors or speculation. I deal in ledgers, balance sheets, and receipts. I am trained to spot inconsistencies and uncover hidden truths. Yet the biggest fraud of my life was happening right over my head, and I was completely blind to it. For the past 5 years, I believed I had a solid, loving marriage. My husband, Brad, is a senior sales director. He is 35 years old, ambitious, charismatic, and always chasing the next big quarterly target. Our life together in our quiet suburban home felt safe and predictable. That weekend, Brad had announced he was going into a strict 48-hour lockdown. He claimed his company was pitching a massive new account, and he needed absolute silence to finalize the proposal. He kissed my forehead on Friday evening, took a pitcher of coffee into our upstairs home office, and firmly shut the door. He even hung a little handwritten "Do Not Disturb" sign on the doorknob. I respected his boundaries. I spent my Saturday downstairs in the living room, working on my own audit reports, enjoying the quiet house, and feeling proud of how hard my husband worked for our future. I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong until my phone rang at exactly 2:15 on Saturday afternoon. The caller ID showed my Uncle Harrison. Harrison is 62 years old, a self-made billionaire who built a massive cruise line empire from a single rusty fishing boat. He is a tough, no-nonsense man who despises fake people and values loyalty above all else. He has always had a soft spot for me, recognizing that we share the same practical, hardworking nature. I answered the phone with a smile, expecting him to ask about my recent promotion. Instead, his voice sounded tight and unusually grim. Brenda, is your husband home right now? He asked, skipping the usual pleasantries. I frowned, glancing up toward the ceiling. Yes, he is upstairs in his office, I replied easily. He has been locked in there since yesterday for a huge work deadline. Why do you ask? The silence on the other end of the line felt heavy, stretching on for several uncomfortable seconds. Brenda Harrison finally said, his voice dropping an octave. I am standing on the private boarding deck of my flagship vessel at the port of Miami. I was reviewing the VIP passenger manifest for the owner suite, just keeping an eye on things when I saw a familiar name. I went down to the terminal to check for myself. Brad is not in your upstairs office. He is standing at my priority check-in desk right now, and he is holding hands with Sydney. My brain, trained to process logic and reject anomalies, instantly fought back against the information. That makes absolutely no sense, Uncle Harrison, I said, my voice rising with nervous laughter. Brad is upstairs. I can hear the floorboards creaking. And Sydney is at a wellness and yoga retreat in Vermont this weekend. You must have seen someone who looks like them. Sydney is my 30-year-old sister. She is the beautiful, pampered golden child of our family, the one who always got everything she wanted while I worked for what I had. The idea of her and my husband taking a luxury vacation together was so absurd, it belonged in a soap opera, not my reality. I am telling you what I see with my own 2 eyes, Harrison insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. I know my own niece and I know the man you married. They are boarding my ship. Go upstairs right now, Brenda. Open that office door and tell me what you see. My pulse began to hammer against my ribs. I stood up from my desk, my phone pressed hard against my ear, staring at the staircase. I told myself Uncle Harrison was just getting old, that his vision was failing him, that this was all a massive misunderstanding. I took one step toward the stairs when a sudden loud noise shattered the quiet of the house. The heavy oak front door clicked and swung open. My breath caught in my throat. Brad was supposedly locked upstairs, and I was not expecting any visitors. My mind jumped to the worst-case scenario. An intruder. Someone had realized the house was quiet and decided to break in. Panic flooded my veins. I dropped my phone onto the sofa, ignoring Uncle Harrison shouting my name through the speaker. I scanned the room, grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the console table, and raised it high above my shoulder. My heart pounded so hard it physically hurt my chest. I crept toward the entryway, ready to swing. But the person standing in my foyer was not a burglar. It was Devin, my sister Sydney's husband. Devin is an African-American cybersecurity expert, usually the calmest man I know. Today, his jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with fury. He held up a flashing tablet. "They are in Miami right now," he quietly whispered. I lowered the heavy crystal vase, my hands trembling so violently it nearly slipped from my grip. Devin stepped fully into the foyer, holding out his tablet. The screen displayed a digital map with a pulsing red dot resting squarely over the Port of Miami terminal. Devin is a cybersecurity expert for a major defense contractor. He lives and breathes digital tracking, network security, and encrypted data. When he tells you someone is in a specific location, it is not a guess. It is a documented fact. I shook my head, my auditor brain desperately clinging to logic. "Devin, that has to be a mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Brad is right upstairs. I literally heard him typing 10 minutes ago. He is running a VPN for his corporate network." Devin did not blink. His eyes, usually warm and welcoming, were cold and hard. Brenda Sydney told me she was going to a digital detox retreat in Vermont. She said there would be no cell service, but she forgot that we share an iCloud account for our smart home devices. Her tablet pinged an open Wi-Fi network at the Miami cruise terminal 20 minutes ago. I drove straight here because I saw Brad's location ping right next to hers. They are together. I stared at the ceiling. The faint rhythmic tapping of a keyboard echoed down the staircase. It sounded perfectly normal. It sounded like my hardworking husband securing our financial future. But suddenly the sound turned sinister. "Show me," Devin demanded, striding past me toward the stairs. I dropped the vase onto the console table and followed him, my pulse thundering in my ears. We rushed up the wooden steps, taking them two at a time, the sound of the keyboard growing louder with every upward stride. We reached the landing and stood in front of the heavy oak door of the home office. The handwritten "Do Not Disturb" sign still hung from the brass knob, mocking me. "Brad," I called out, knocking sharply on the wood. "Brad, open the door right now." The typing sound continued. There was no pause, no shifting of a chair, no heavy footsteps coming to answer. "Brad!" I yelled louder, aggressively rattling the knob. It was locked securely from the inside. Devin did not waste time with pleasantries or hesitation. He took a purposeful step back, raised his right leg, and drove his heels squarely into the space right next to the lock mechanism. The wood splintered with a loud crack, the metal latch tearing through the frame, and the door flew open, slamming hard against the interior wall. We burst into the room. The office was completely empty. My breath caught in my throat. I looked around the meticulously organized space. The expensive ergonomic desk chair was empty. The window was shut tight, locked from the inside. There was absolutely no way out. Yet the sound of rapid typing filled the room. Devin marched straight to the desk and picked up a small, sleek Bluetooth speaker, hidden expertly behind the dual monitors. He turned it over, exposing a looping audio track of keyboard clicks and mouse movements playing from a connected device. He set the speaker down and pointed to the primary monitor. Brad's corporate email application was open, showing a green active dot next to his name. Plugged into the side of the laptop docking station was a tiny flashing USB device. "A mouse jiggler," Devin said, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "It sends micro movements to the computer every few seconds so the screen never locks, and his corporate status never goes idle." He paired it with a spoofed VPN router hidden under the desk. To his boss, his co-workers, and to you, it looks exactly like he is sitting right here grinding away at a weekend project. It is a classic decoy setup used to trick remote monitoring software. My professional instincts violently collided with my personal reality. As an internal auditor, my entire career relies on identifying fraudulent systems designed to bypass corporate oversight. Brad had created a physical and digital smokescreen right inside our own home. He knew I respected his work ethic too much to ever force my way into his office during a lockdown. He had weaponized my trust and my profound respect for his career to orchestrate the perfect escape. "Where is his personal laptop?" Devin asked, his eyes rapidly scanning the room. I pointed to the leather messenger bag tucked under a side table near the bookshelf. He usually keeps his personal MacBook in there. He only uses the corporate machine for actual work stuff. Devin grabbed the bag, pulled out the sleek silver laptop, and flipped it open on the desk. The lock screen demanded a complex password. Brad always bragged about his security measures, claiming his sales data needed top-tier protection. Devin just scoffed at the screen. "Give me 2 minutes," Devin said, pulling a specialized flash drive from his pocket. "You do not spend 10 years doing penetration testing for defense networks without learning how to bypass basic consumer encryption." He plugged the drive into the side of the MacBook, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that made my head spin. Lines of diagnostic code cascaded down the dark screen as he forced his way past the login prompt. While Devin worked his magic, my mind raced through the financial implications of this betrayal. If Brad had actually flown to Miami and boarded a luxury cruise with my sister, how did he pay for it? Brad always complained about his bonus structures being delayed by his company. We kept our daily checking accounts separate, splitting the household bills directly down the middle. But we maintained one massive joint account, our life savings, the money we were actively setting aside to build a nursery and finally start our family. "I am in Devin," announced, breaking my train of thought. The desktop loaded smoothly. He opened Brad's personal email client. The screen populated with hundreds of unread promotional messages, but Devin went straight to the search bar. Knowing the destination, he typed the name of my Uncle Harrison's cruise line company. Instantly, a confirmation email popped up at the very top of the list. The subject line read, "VIP owner suite booking confirmed." Devin clicked the email to expand it. The itinerary detailed a lavish 7-day luxury excursion through the Caribbean islands, departing today from the port of Miami. The passenger names were clearly printed in bold black letters right at the top of the digital ticket: Bradley and Sydney. The total cost of the ticket sat at the bottom of the invoice, glaring back at us: $25,000. My auditor brain entirely bypassed the emotional devastation of my sister stealing my husband and immediately zeroed in on the numbers. $25,000 was not casual spending money. It was a calculated, massive withdrawal that required planning. I leaned over Devin's shoulder, my eyes frantically scanning the fine print of the receipt, looking for the billing information section. I needed to see which credit card he had maxed out, which hidden offshore account he had drained to fund this despicable betrayal. My eyes locked onto the last 4 digits of the payment method listed on the invoice. The air completely vanished from my lungs. The numbers blurred for a split second, then snapped into agonizing sharp focus. It was not a hidden credit card. It was not a corporate expense account he was misusing. It was the routing number for our joint life savings account. I shoved Devin aside and quickly grabbed my silver laptop. Shock quickly gave way to cold, calculating adrenaline. As a corporate auditor, I hunt financial discrepancies daily. I track hidden assets. Now the system being targeted was my own marriage. I sat on the bottom step, balancing the laptop on my knees. I opened my banking app, typing credentials frantically. I slammed the authentication code into the prompt. The dashboard loaded our liquid assets. The number staring back at me was wrong. It was catastrophically wrong. We had over $200,000 in our savings. It was the money we stockpiled for our future child, for renovations, for the life we had planned. The current balance displayed on the screen was a pathetic $42,000. Devin knelt beside me, his large frame casting a shadow over the screen. He let out a low, furious breath. "Brenda, where did it go?" he asked, his voice tight with rage. "I do not know yet," I replied flatly. "Give me 5 minutes." I did not cry. Crying was for later. Right now, I needed the data. I exported the transaction history for the past 12 months into a raw spreadsheet. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing shortcut commands, building pivot tables, and filtering out standard recurring expenses. I isolated every single outgoing wire transfer and external routing request. The pattern emerged instantly, glaringly obvious to my trained eyes. Brad had not drained the account in one massive lump sum. He had been siphoning the money out systematically, calculating his moves to stay just under banking alert thresholds. It started exactly 6 months ago, around the time he took a sudden business trip to Chicago. A trip I now realized was likely a romantic getaway with my sister. There was a transfer for $8,000 logged as a portfolio investment. 2 weeks later, a withdrawal for $14,000, categorized as a home repair retainer. Then came a steady rhythm of $10,000 transfers labeled as legal consulting fees, tax prep advances, and generic wealth management deposits. He bled me dry, I stated, staring at the hard, undeniable math on the screen. He took exactly $150,000 over a 6-month period. He methodically gutted our entire future to fund his affair with your wife. Devin stood up, pacing the narrow entryway of my house like a caged animal. His hands were curled into tight fists. "This explains so much," Devin said, shaking his head in absolute disgust. Sydney came home last month with a completely new designer wardrobe. She told me her own parents gave her an early birthday bonus. She said her father had a great quarter with his investments and wanted to spoil her. She was literally parading around my house wearing your stolen life savings. The mention of my parents sent a sharp jolt through my system. Patricia and Richard, my mother and father. Growing up, the dynamic in our household was never a secret. Sydney was the undisputed golden child. She was the beautiful, charismatic daughter who commanded every room, while I was the quiet, practical one forced to be responsible. When Sydney wrecked her car at 19, my parents bought her a new one. When she failed out of her first college, they paid a premium for private tutoring and transferred her to a more expensive university. I paid my own way through state school and earned my auditing credentials through sheer grit. Despite the blatant favoritism, I always believed there was a fundamental baseline of morality in our family. Stealing a husband and emptying a life savings account was a line too far. Surely my parents would be horrified. Surely they would recognize that Sydney had finally crossed a boundary that could not be excused by her pretty smile. "I need to call my parents," I told Devin quickly, picking up my phone from the floor. "They need to know what their precious daughter has done. I am definitely going to have Uncle Harrison pull the ship back to the dock, and I want my parents waiting there when she gets off." I dialed my mother's number and put the phone on speaker, holding it between Devin and myself. The line rang 3 times before my mother answered. Her background was noisy, filled with the sounds of a television and clinking glass. "Brenda." "I am quite busy right now," Patricia said, her tone carrying its usual hint of mild irritation whenever I interrupted her weekend schedule. "Your father and I are trying to watch the golf tournament. What is it?" "Mom, you need to sit down," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and devastation. "Brad is not upstairs working. Devin is here at my house." He tracked Sydney's phone. "Brad and Sydney are together right now. They are currently boarding a luxury cruise ship out of Miami. And Mom, Brad stole $150,000 from my savings account to pay for it. They have been having an affair for 6 months. I stopped talking, bracing myself for the gasp of shock, the immediate outrage, the protective anger a mother should feel when her eldest daughter's life is destroyed by her youngest. I waited for her to scream, to ask for Devin to confirm the tracking data, to offer to call the police. Instead, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the speakerphone. The television in the background was muted. When my mother finally spoke, her voice did not hold a single ounce of shock, horror, or sympathy. There was no outrage on my behalf. There was only a heavy, burdened sigh, the exact kind of sigh a parent gives when a child is being stubbornly difficult over a trivial rule. "I was actually going to tell you next week." Brenda Patricia sighed in deep annoyance. "Sydney is pregnant with Brad's child. They are in love. You need to step aside gracefully right now." The words hung in the air of my foyer like a toxic gas. I stood completely frozen, staring at the phone in my hand. Beside me, Devin actually took a physical step back, his face twisting into a mask of pure disbelief. Pregnant. I repeated the words, scraping against my throat like broken glass. You knew they were sleeping together, and you knew she was pregnant. Do not use that accusatory tone with me, Patricia snapped. Her voice was sharp, carrying the precise frequency she always used to shut down my complaints when we were children. Sydney was terrified to tell you. She came to us crying 2 months ago. The poor girl has been a nervous wreck, Brenda. You know how delicate her health can be, and stress is terrible for the baby. Brad has been an absolute rock for her. They belong together. You simply have to accept it. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The sheer audacity of her statement defied all logic. My mother was actively praising my husband for being a rock for my sister, the woman he was cheating on me with. There was a shuffling sound on the other end of the line, and then my father's voice boomed through the speaker. Brenda, listen to your mother, Richard commanded. His tone was smooth, authoritative, and dripping with the arrogant entitlement of a man who cared about nothing but his country club status and corporate golf buddies. We are dealing with a highly sensitive family matter here. The last thing we need is you throwing a hysterical fit and causing a public scandal. This needs to be handled quietly and efficiently. A scandal. Devin spoke up, his deep voice vibrating with barely contained fury. You are worried about a public scandal. Your daughter is sleeping with my wife. My wife is carrying his child, and you are worried about your country club friends finding out. Richard did not miss a beat. His dismissal of Devin was swift and freezing. Devin, you are a smart man. You have a good tech career. You can easily find someone else. Sydney was never truly suited for you anyway. You are too different. Just cut your losses and walk away. We will ensure the divorce paperwork is handled discreetly. The casual racism and blatant disrespect aimed at Devin made my blood boil. But before Devin could retaliate, Patricia took the phone back. Now, Brenda, we have thought this through. Patricia continued, her tone shifting to a sickeningly sweet conversational pitch, as if we were discussing dinner reservations. You are a successful auditor. You have a strong career. You are fiercely independent. Sydney is not like you. She needs stability, especially now with the baby coming. Brad is willing to step up and be a proper father, but they need a proper home to start their new family. A cold chill radiated down my spine. I knew exactly where this twisted logic was heading, but my brain refused to accept that my own mother could be this monstrous. What are you saying, Mom? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Your house, Brenda, Patricia said brightly, completely devoid of shame. It is in an excellent school district. It has 4 bedrooms, and the yard is perfect for a child. Since you are working so much anyway, you do not really need all that space. You can easily afford a luxury condo downtown. We want you to sign over the equity of the house to Sydney and Brad. Consider it your contribution to your new niece or nephew. I stared at the phone. My husband had stolen my life savings to take my sister on a luxury cruise. My sister was pregnant with his child, and my parents were demanding that I hand over the deed to my house so the 2 traders could play happy family in the very home I had paid for. They did not just want me to step aside. They wanted me to fund my own replacement. If you agree to a quiet, no-fault divorce and transfer the property, your father and I will cover the legal fees, Patricia offered, framing her extortion as a generous gift. We just want peace, Brenda. Be the bigger person here. Do not make this ugly. If you drag this into court, you will tear this family apart. They were using the same tactic they had used my entire life, demanding my sacrifice to ensure Sydney's comfort, weaponizing my independence against me, and threatening me with the destruction of the family if I dared to stand up for myself. For 33 years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had smiled through the blatant favoritism. I had accepted the leftover affection. But right then, standing in the hallway of the house I had worked 80-hour weeks to buy, something inside me completely snapped. The devastated, betrayed wife vanished. The obedient, peacekeeping daughter died on the spot. In their place, the senior internal auditor stepped forward. As an auditor, I do not process emotion. I process data. I processed liabilities, assets, risks, and penalties. My parents were not family anymore. They were hostile entities attempting to defraud me of my assets. They had shown their hand laying out their entire strategy in one phone call. They wanted a quiet resolution because they knew a loud one would destroy their precious social standing. "Okay," I said, my voice echoing with an unnatural, icy steadiness. "I hear what you are saying. I need some time to process all of this logistics. Let me review the finances and I will get back to you." Patricia let out a relieved breath, completely oblivious to the trap she had just walked into. "I knew you would be reasonable, Brenda. You always are. Take the weekend. We will have the lawyers draft the equity transfer papers on Monday." I ended the call. The silence in the foyer was deafening. Devin looked at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and rage at what he had just witnessed. "They want you to give her your house," he stated, his voice tight. "They want us to just walk away and let them take everything. Brenda, we cannot let them do this." I looked down at the phone in my hand, then back up at Devin. I did not shed a single tear. My vision had never been clearer. My mind was already categorizing the banking records, the wire transfers, the cruise line booking, and the massive financial vulnerabilities I knew my parents possessed. I slipped my phone into my pocket and met Devin's furious gaze with absolute unshakable resolve. Devin did not hesitate. He gave a single sharp nod, completely matching my sudden shift in demeanor. We turned our backs on the broken front door and marched straight up the stairs, returning to the scene of my husband's digital crime. The fake typing audio was still looping from the Bluetooth speaker on the desk, a pathetic, repetitive soundtrack to Brad's massive deception. Devin reached over the monitors and aggressively yanked the power cord directly from the wall socket. The sudden silence in the home office was deafening, but it was the exact kind of cold, heavy quiet I desperately needed to focus my mind. I sat down at the desk and pulled up the raw banking spreadsheet I had exported earlier. The $150,000 missing from our joint savings account was a devastating emotional blow, but I knew it was only the beginning of the trail. As a senior internal auditor, I know from years of experience that when a liar gets comfortable, they get incredibly sloppy. Brad had always been a deeply arrogant man. He possessed that specific brand of corporate hubris that made him believe he was inherently the smartest person in any room. He kept his financial life aggressively compartmentalized, always insisting that his high-level business accounts were far too complex for anyone outside his firm to properly understand. He assumed I would never cross the boundary into his professional sphere because he knew I respected his privacy. He assumed completely wrong. Devin slid a second chair over and sat in front of Brad's unlocked personal MacBook. While I meticulously scoured our personal bank statements line by line, Devin began digging deep into the hidden directories on the hard drive. He bypassed the standard user folders and went straight for the encrypted partitions. Brad was a senior sales director, not a software engineer. His amateur attempts at digital security were absolutely laughable to a seasoned cybersecurity expert like Devin. Within 10 short minutes, Devin had cracked open a hidden password-protected folder on the desktop, labeled with nothing but a random string of numbers. "Brenda, you really need to see this right now," Devin said, his voice dropping an octave as he shifted the silver laptop screen toward me. I leaned in, my eyes rapidly scanning the dozens of documents populating the screen. There were countless PDF files, bank transfer receipts, and heavily redacted legal contracts. I double-clicked on the very first file. It was a wire transfer confirmation from Brad's primary individual checking account to an entity named Apex Holdings LLC. The transferred amount was $12,000. I quickly clicked the next file. It was another massive transfer to Apex Holdings LLC, this time for $18,000. I frowned, pulling up my own banking spreadsheet and cross-referencing the exact transfer dates. "Brad, wait," I muttered, tracing my finger across the screen. I highlighted a specific row on my monitor. "Look at this timeline, Devin." On the 4th of the month, Brad withdrew $10,000 from our joint life savings. On the 6th of the month, he wired $15,000 from his personal account directly to Apex Holdings LLC. He was actively mixing our stolen savings with other funds, and funneling them all into this obscure company. Devin immediately pulled up a secure browser and ran a rapid search on the State Division of Corporations Public Registry. He typed Apex Holdings LLC into the database. The search results returned an active corporation, but the registered agent was a generic third-party legal firm. It was a shell company, a classic textbook ghost entity specifically designed by a lawyer to hide the true owner of the financial assets. Who actually owns this thing? Devin muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he initiated a deep web search, pulling public property records and corporate tax filings. He is routing massive amounts of untraceable cash into this black hole. What exactly is Apex Holdings? My mind began connecting the terrifying dots. Brad was a senior director at a major financial institution. His company handled multi-million-dollar vendor contracts on a daily basis. If Brad was secretly funneling money into a shell company, there was a very high probability he was not just stealing from his own wife. I needed to look at his corporate vendor list immediately. I grabbed the mouse connected to his work laptop, the one still running the spoofed VPN network, and the flashing mouse jiggler. Since the machine was actively logged into his highly secure corporate intranet, I had full unfettered access to his employee dashboard. I quickly navigated to the internal procurement portal. My heart beat a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs as I bypassed the security warnings and accessed the master vendor database. I typed Apex Holdings LLC into the corporate search bar and hit enter. The system loaded for a fraction of a second before displaying a detailed vendor profile. My breath completely caught in my throat. There it was. Apex Holdings LLC was listed as an approved active vendor specifically assigned to Brad's department. The service description vaguely cited strategic market analysis and regional consulting fees. But it was the payment history that made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. Over the past 8 months, Brad had personally authorized and approved over $350,000 in corporate payouts to this exact shell company. He is actively embezzling. I stated the harsh reality of the situation washing over me in a wave of absolute shock. Devin looked closely at these numbers. Brad is using his executive authority to approve fake corporate invoices. He is fraudulently billing his own employer for phantom consulting services and paying the stolen money out to a shell company he secretly controls. He is stealing massive amounts of corporate funds. Devin stared blindly at the screen, his jaw dropping in disbelief. $350,000 from his company, plus the $150,000 he stole from your joint savings. That is $500,000 in stolen cash, Brenda. Where the hell is all this money going? He is a corporate sales guy, not a cartel boss. What is he possibly buying with $500,000? We violently turned our attention back to the hidden folder on the MacBook. We needed the smoking gun. We needed the ultimate destination of the stolen funds. I aggressively scrolled past the wire transfers and clicked on a subfolder simply labeled residential. Inside was a single massive PDF document. I opened it with a trembling hand. It was a finalized, fully signed real estate contract. I rapidly read the property description. It was a luxury top-floor penthouse apartment located in one of the most exclusive, expensive districts in downtown Miami. The purchase price was astronomical, but it was the signatures on the bottom of the deed that completely paralyzed me. The official buyer was listed as Apex Holdings LLC. But the authorized resident, the person with the exclusive legal right to occupy the penthouse, was clearly printed in bold black ink. My own sister Sydney. The fractured pieces of the puzzle slammed together with violent, undeniable clarity. Brad had not just drained my life savings to pay for a simple luxury cruise. He had orchestrated a massive, highly illegal financial scheme. He had created a fake company, embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from his corporate employer, and combined it with the money he stole from my future child's nursery fund. He did all of this to secretly purchase a $1 million luxury penthouse for my pregnant, backstabbing sister. Devin let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that sounded completely broken. He bought her a penthouse. My wife is moving into a Miami penthouse paid for by your husband. My hands tightly gripped the edge of the wooden desk. Brad had thought he was a genius. He believed his arrogant, compartmentalized digital trail would forever remain hidden behind his corporate passwords and my blind trust. He thought he was completely untouchable. Instead, he had just handed me the exact weapon I desperately needed to destroy his entire existence. He deliberately crossed state lines. I said, my voice eerily calm as the massive gravity of his actions finally settled deep into my bones. He used corporate wire transfers to funnel stolen money across state lines to purchase real estate through a fraudulent entity. Devin looked at me, his eyes widening as he realized exactly what I was saying. Brad is not just a cheating husband anymore, Devin. I turned to look at my brother-in-law, a cold, calculating smile slowly spreading across my face. By routing stolen corporate funds through digital networks to purchase that penthouse, Brad just committed massive, irrefutable federal wire fraud. Federal wire fraud. Devin repeated, letting the weight of the phrase settle into the room. If the FBI gets wind of this, he is looking at a decade in federal prison. But Brenda, a ghost LLC, does not just magically approve itself for $1 million real estate transaction. You need a verified paper trail. You need established credit. You need an initial physical address and a registered network to file the incorporation documents with the state. Brad could not have done this from his corporate office without triggering internal security alerts, and he definitely did not do it from this house. Find the origin, I commanded, pulling my chair closer to the desk. Find exactly where and when Apex Holdings LLC was officially born. Devin cracked his knuckles and dove back into the encrypted folders. He isolated the original digital PDF of the state incorporation filing. Using a specialized metadata extractor, he stripped the document down to its core raw data. He bypassed the visual text and went straight into the hidden digital footprint embedded in the file history. Every time a document is created, saved, or uploaded to a state portal, it leaves an invisible stamp. Devin explained, his fingers moving with practiced precision. An IP address, a digital fingerprint that tells me exactly which internet router was used to send the data into the world. Let us see where Brad was sitting when he officially crossed the line into federal crime. A series of numbers populated on a black terminal window. Devin copied the IP address and ran it through a geolocation tracking tool. A map of our state loaded onto the screen, rapidly zooming in on a specific residential neighborhood. It bypassed the corporate downtown district completely. It bypassed our quiet suburban street. The red tracking dot landed squarely in the middle of a highly affluent gated community 20 miles away. I stopped breathing. I leaned forward until my nose was practically touching the monitor. The address displayed on the right side of the screen was etched into my brain permanently. It was a sprawling, pristine estate with manicured lawns and a grand circular driveway. Devin. I whispered, the cold reality slicing through my chest like a physical blade. That is my parents' house. Devin froze. He looked at the map, then looked at me, his expression shifting from focused intensity to absolute horror. Are you absolutely sure I grew up in that house? I stated, my voice devoid of all warmth. I know that address better than my own. Brad did not set up this fraudulent shell company from a coffee shop or a burner network. He set it up sitting in my parents' living room using their private home Wi-Fi network. The pieces of the nightmare rapidly locked into place. The phone call from earlier suddenly made terrifying sense. My mother had not just been callously protecting her golden child from a social scandal. She was actively protecting a criminal enterprise she had helped facilitate. Patricia and Richard had always bent over backwards to ensure Sydney lived a life of absolute luxury regardless of her own failures. But this was an entirely new level of toxic enabling. They had allowed Brad to use their pristine, wealthy residential address to legitimize a fake company. They were hosting a money laundering operation right under their own roof, just to ensure their favorite daughter got a penthouse with an ocean view. They are accomplices, Devin said, shaking his head in disgust. Brenda, your parents literally hosted the creation of a fraudulent entity used to launder embezzled corporate funds. If the federal authorities trace this, IP address, your mother and father are going down as co-conspirators to wire fraud. Pull the rest of the real estate closing documents, I ordered, my hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. $1 million penthouse in Miami requires massive proof of funds. Even with the $500,000 Brad stole from me and his employer, they still fall short of the purchase price. Ghost LLCs do not get approved for traditional mortgages without heavily vetted financial backers. Someone had to sign on the dotted line to guarantee the remaining balance. Find the collateral agreement. Devin immediately returned to the hidden folder. He opened a massive encrypted zip file labeled Final Closing Disclosures. He bypassed the standard title deeds and went straight for the underwriting section. He scrolled past pages of dense legal jargon until he hit the financial guarantor addendum. The screen illuminated the final fatal mistake my parents had made. "Look at this," Devin said, pointing to the heavily notarized signatures at the bottom of the document. They're printed in bold, undeniable ink were the names Patricia and Richard. They were listed as the primary financial guarantors for the remaining $500,000 mortgage on the Miami penthouse. But it was the collateral section that made my internal auditor instincts flare with absolute shock. My parents had not just co-signed a standard loan, they were retired. They lived a lavish lifestyle, but their actual liquid income was limited to strict pension payouts and stagnant investments. To secure the massive loan for Sydney's luxury penthouse, they had been forced to offer up the only tangible asset they possessed with enough equity to satisfy the bank. They had taken out a massive high-interest second mortgage on their own sprawling estate to back the penthouse loan. I stared at the financial terms laid out on the screen. The interest rate was absolutely predatory. The repayment terms were aggressive, completely dependent on the monthly cash flow Brad was secretly embezzling from his company. If Brad stopped making the massive monthly payments, the bank would immediately trigger a default clause. "Do you understand what this means?" I asked Devin, my voice vibrating with a sudden, overwhelming sense of power. My parents mortgaged their entire existence to fund Sydney's stolen life. They tied their own house, their entire retirement security, to a shell company funded entirely by stolen money. Devin looked at the screen, a slow, dangerous realization dawning in his eyes. If Brad gets caught, the feds will seize the stolen corporate funds. The LLC accounts will be completely frozen. The monthly payments on the Miami penthouse will instantly bounce. "Exactly," I replied, a cold, ruthless smile spreading across my face. "When the payments bounce, the bank will immediately demand the collateral from the guarantors. If the LLC falls, my parents lose everything. The bank will seize their estate. Patricia and Richard will be thrown out on the street entirely bankrupt." His phone vibrated in his pocket, a harsh buzz breaking the atmosphere of the home office. He pulled it out, his eyes narrowing as he tapped a secure notification alert. "Sydney blocked me on all her main social media accounts the second she boarded that ship," Devin said. "But she is incredibly vain, Brenda. She cannot exist without an audience to validate her existence. She has a private close friends list on a secondary Instagram account. She thinks she locked it down completely, but she forgot I built our home network infrastructure from scratch. I still have a mirrored token to her personal device." He swiped across his screen, bypassing the login protocols with terrifying efficiency. He cast his phone display directly onto the large secondary monitor sitting on Brad's desk. The screen flickered black for a fraction of a second before exploding into vibrant color. There they were, my husband and my sister broadcasting their ultimate betrayal in real time. The live video showed a sweeping panoramic view of the Caribbean Ocean, the water a dazzling crystalline blue, reflecting the bright afternoon sun. The camera quickly panned back to reveal the expansive private balcony of the owner's suite on Uncle Harrison's flagship luxury liner. Brad was lounging on a pristine white sunbed, wearing designer sunglasses and an expensive linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. Sydney was stretched out right beside him, holding a tall crystal flute filled with vintage champagne. Her newly acquired designer jewelry glittered aggressively in the bright sunlight. They looked entirely carefree, completely devoid of any guilt, hesitation, or moral conflict. It was a display of pure, unfiltered sociopathy. Sydney angled the camera to capture their smiling faces. Cheers to the absolute good life, she purred directly into the microphone, taking a long sip of her drink. We finally escaped the dead weight holding us back. Brad laughed an arrogant sound that made my stomach churn. He leaned over and kissed her cheek, resting his hand casually on her slightly rounded stomach. Here is to leaving the boring numbers drone far behind us, Brad sneered, looking directly into the camera lens with absolute contempt. Imagine spending your beautiful weekend analyzing dusty spreadsheets when you could be living like absolute royalty on the open ocean. And let us pour one out for the clueless tech geek who still thinks he is successfully tracking network threats while his beautiful wife is sailing away to paradise. Sydney giggled loudly, a high, piercing sound that used to grate on my nerves at endless family dinners, but now filled me with absolute revulsion. They do not have a single clue, Brad added, raising his own glass to the camera lens to toast his perceived victory. They are probably sitting at home right now, eating cheap takeout and watching boring television, completely oblivious to what is actually happening in the real world. I watched my husband of 10 years mock my entire existence while sitting on a luxury vacation funded entirely by the life savings he stole from my bank account. He was celebrating a stolen life, parading his infidelity and his massive financial crimes as if they were enormous personal victories. The sheer level of emotional detachment required to look into a camera and openly humiliate the woman you promised to love while simultaneously bankrupting her was staggering. They possessed a deeply disturbing lack of empathy, entirely comfortable building their new paradise on the ashes of the lives they destroyed without a single backward glance. Right at that exact moment, my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden surface of the desk. I looked down at the brightly illuminated screen. A text message from Brad had just arrived in my inbox. I opened the message, placing my phone flat on the desk, right next to the monitor, where his laughing, arrogant face was still frozen on Devon's paused video feed. The text read, "Working hard on this code right now. My eyes are severely burning from staring at these dual monitors all day, but the massive sales pitch is almost completely done. I miss you, babe. Cannot wait to finally come downstairs and order some hot dinner with you tonight. Love you so much." I read the words twice, letting the utter depravity of his bold lie wash completely over me. He had taken time to type out a highly affectionate message to his devoted wife while actively sitting on a cruise ship balcony with his pregnant mistress. He was playing a sick psychological game, ensuring my complete compliance and blind trust while he finalized the absolute destruction of my financial future. He wanted me docile and unaware until the very last possible second. Devon looked from my illuminated phone to the paused monitor, his jaw locked incredibly tight. "He is a monster," Devon stated, his voice a low, extremely dangerous rumble echoing in the quiet room. "He is a remorseless monster who enjoys inflicting pain on the innocent. He is a criminal." I corrected, feeling the last remaining shred of my marital affection incinerate into pure ash, leaving only a cold, hard resolve behind. And criminals always leave a distinct trail of undeniable evidence. He thinks he is completely untouchable because he truly believes I am just a boring numbers drone who follows the rules blindly. He thinks my dedication to protocol makes me weak and predictable. He is about to learn that a senior auditor with a personal grudge is the absolute most dangerous entity in the entire corporate world. I picked up my phone with absolute precision. I did not throw it against the wall in rage. I did not scream in agony at the profound injustice. I typed my direct reply with steady, perfectly controlled fingers. I sent a single, incredibly simple text message back to the arrogant man who ruined my entire life. "Hope the project goes perfectly," I typed, adding a small, bright red heart emoji just to flawlessly match his sickening level of deception. I hit the send button, tossed the phone aside, and turned my full attention back to my powerful laptop. I opened a new highly encrypted document on my desktop. I immediately titled the blank page "Federal Whistleblower Report, Internal Embezzlement, and Corporate Wire Fraud." I turned to Devon, my eyes locked onto his, with an intense, burning determination that matched his own fierce expression. "Download every single video she posts from that ship," I instructed him, my tone shifting into pure corporate command mode. Capture the hidden metadata, the precise timestamps, and the exact geolocation tags embedded in the files. I want the specific IP addresses of those fraudulent wire transfers perfectly merged with the official corporate vendor profiles. We are going to quickly compile a comprehensive dossier, so flawless, so mathematically bulletproof, that the federal authorities will have absolutely no choice but to issue a massive arrest warrant the exact second he steps off that luxury boat. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed my Uncle Harrison back. The line barely rang once before his gruff voice filled the speaker. He was still standing in the private terminal of his Miami port, furious and demanding answers. I quickly gave him the brutally short version of the last 30 minutes. I explained the spoofed network, the drained life savings, the federal corporate embezzlement, and the luxury penthouse purchased right under our noses. Then I told him about my mother, his own sister Patricia, and her active, willing participation in helping Brad hide his massive financial crimes. Uncle Harrison let out a sound that was half growl and half heavy sigh. He is a man who clawed his way up from absolutely nothing. He started with a single rusted fishing boat and built a multi-billion-dollar luxury maritime empire purely through relentless discipline and unbreakable integrity. He always recognized that same exact drive in me. He watched me pay my own way through state college, while Patricia and Richard handed Sydney everything on a silver platter. He absolutely despised the toxic entitlement that poisoned his sister and his youngest niece. Patricia always was a spineless enabler. Harrison stated, his voice tight with deep, resonant anger. She raised Sydney to believe the world owed her a crown without ever lifting a finger to earn it. And now they are helping a corporate criminal rob you blind just to keep up appearances. I will throw them off my ship right now, Brenda. I will have port security drag them down the gangway by their designer collars and leave them stranded on the concrete. I shook my head, even though he could not see me. No, I replied, my tone razor sharp. Do not kick them off the ship. Keep them exactly where they are. I need them trapped in international waters while Devin and I dismantle their entire operation back here on the mainland. But Uncle Harrison, I have a massive problem. Brad is an expert liar. He set up a physical decoy in his home office to create an airtight alibi. He is running a spoofed private network, making it look like his corporate laptop is currently active in our house. If I go to the federal authorities right now, his high-priced corporate defense lawyers will argue that someone else stole his identity and purchased that ticket. They will claim he was home working the entire time. I need absolute, undeniable, time-stamped proof that Bradley is physically standing on your ship. I need a verified financial transaction ping from a physical point-of-sale terminal. Harrison let out a low, appreciative chuckle. He always loved a calculated, strategic strike. Give me exactly 5 minutes, he told me. I own this entire floating palace. I know exactly how to stroke a narcissist's ego until they gladly hand over their own neck. Stay logged into your banking portal, Brenda. You are about to get the exact location ping you need. He hung up the phone. I turned back to my dual monitors. Devin had already successfully mirrored Brad's financial dashboard on the screen. We watched the transaction ledger with bated breath. Somewhere down in Miami, Uncle Harrison was setting the ultimate snare. As the owner of the cruise line, he possessed absolute authority over every single digital and physical system on that vessel. He bypassed the standard guest services desk and contacted his elite chief concierge directly. The instructions were highly specific and required immediate execution. Harrison ordered his staff to approach Brad and Sydney while they were lounging on the private deck. The concierge was told to present them with a completely fake, incredibly exclusive promotional offer. Because they were deemed high-value VIP passengers, the cruise line was supposedly upgrading them to the pinnacle accommodation on the entire ship, the owner's suite. It was a sprawling multi-room haven featuring a private dining area, a massive wrap-around balcony, a personal hot tub, and a dedicated butler. It was an upgrade worth thousands of dollars a night offered to them entirely for free. There was only one minor standard hospitality catch. To activate the complimentary upgrade and unlock the solid gold keycards, company policy strictly mandated that the primary guest had to swipe a physical credit card at the concierge desk to secure an incidental hold. It was a standard security measure for the minibar and premium room service. Brad, completely blinded by his own towering ego and the sheer thrill of scoring a massive luxury upgrade to impress his pregnant mistress, would never suspect a trap. He believed his own charm had secured the ultimate prize. He would eagerly hand over his personal financial information without a single second thought. I sat rigidly at my desk, my eyes unblinking, fixed intensely on the banking portal. Devin stood right behind me, his hands resting heavily on the back of my chair. We waited in absolute suffocating silence. 2 minutes passed, then 3. I imagined Brad confidently strutting up to the gleaming marble concierge desk, Sydney hanging adoringly on his arm, both of them absolutely drunk on their stolen fraudulent success. I imagined him reaching into his expensive leather wallet, pulling out the shiny platinum credit card tied directly to his personal checking account, and handing it to the smiling staff member. A sudden sharp electronic chime echoed loudly from my expensive desktop speakers. The banking portal screen refreshed automatically. A brand new line item populated right at the very top of the pending transaction ledger. It was a temporary authorization hold for exactly $500. I aggressively clicked on the transaction details, expanding the raw data view. The digital receipt contained absolutely everything I needed to lock him away in federal prison. The merchant name read, Maritime Luxury Holdings, FIV-IP Concierge Terminal 4. The transaction type was listed as physical card present chip, inserted and verified. And there, sitting right at the bottom of the digital footprint, was the exact undeniable global positioning system coordinate of the credit card machine. It mapped completely and flawlessly to the port of Miami. I captured the screenshot, saving it directly into the encrypted federal whistleblower file Devin had prepared. The snare had snapped perfectly shut. Brad had just handed me the physical geolocated transaction ping required to destroy his entire alibi. He had locked himself onto that ship with his own sheer greed. But he had absolutely no idea that Uncle Harrison's generous upgrade came with a secondary, deeply hidden feature. One that was about to turn their luxury dream vacation into a completely inescapable, totally isolated, terrifying nightmare. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed my Uncle Harrison to confirm our success. The digital receipt glowed brightly on my monitor, providing the exact proof I needed. I told Harrison that the trap had worked perfectly and that Brad had taken the bait without a single moment of hesitation. Harrison let out a deep, satisfying laugh that resonated through the speaker. He informed me that his head of guest services had just personally escorted the 2 traders up to the private top deck. Brad and Sydney were now officially locked inside the owner's suite, surrounded by imported Italian marble panoramic ocean views and a dedicated butler ready to serve their every whim. But luxury was only the first half of Harrison's brilliant strategy. The second half was absolute terrifying isolation. Harrison explained that people like Brad and Sydney, narcissists who feed entirely on the validation of others, cannot survive in a vacuum. They need an audience. They need to boast. Take away their ability to broadcast their stolen wealth and you turn a floating palace into a psychological prison. Harrison told me to hold the line while he patched his chief marine network engineer directly into our call. A crisp, professional voice joined the conversation. The engineer confirmed he was standing by at the primary server hub, located deep within the hull of the massive ship. Harrison gave the executive order with absolute unwavering authority. He instructed the engineer to completely isolate the owner's suite from every internal and external communication network. He wanted a total digital blackout. Devin leaned closer to the phone, his cybersecurity expertise kicking into high gear. He rapidly provided the engineer with the specific device identifiers he had pulled from Brad and Sydney during his initial hack. Devin commanded the engineer to blacklist their exact hardware profiles across the entire maritime network, ensuring they could not simply connect to a public guest access point if they left the room. The engineer executed the commands with rapid precision. He disabled the wireless access points located inside the suite and deactivated the localized cellular satellite repeaters that serviced their specific balcony. To the rest of the ship, the internet flowed. To Brad and Sydney, the digital world had simply ceased to exist. Harrison instructed his concierge team on how to handle the inevitable complaints. When Brad called down to scream about the lack of service, the staff was trained to apologize profusely, citing a highly localized technical malfunction affecting only that specific suite. They would offer endless free bottles of vintage champagne, complimentary spa treatments, and lavish apologies, but they would fiercely maintain that the internet simply could not be repaired until the ship returned to the mainland. Brad, ever the arrogant executive, would rage and threaten to get people fired, but his anger would be completely useless against a polite, smiling crew following direct orders from the billionaire owner of the company. He would be entirely trapped by the very luxury he had stolen to acquire. He could not storm off the ship because they were already detaching the massive mooring lines and preparing to sail into the deep, unforgiving waters of the Caribbean Sea. Devin kept his eyes glued to his tracking software. We watched the live feed of Sydney's private social media account on the secondary monitor. She was in the middle of uploading a high-definition video of their ocean view, undoubtedly eager to rub her stolen happiness in the faces of her followers. The progress bar on her upload crept forward, reaching 99%. Then it abruptly froze. A red error message flashed aggressively across the screen, indicating a total loss of network connectivity. Devin typed a quick command into his own terminal, verifying the signal drop. The pulsing red dot representing their location vanished completely from his tracking map. The digital link between the ship and the mainland was severed. The blackout was totally complete. I sat back in Brad's expensive ergonomic chair, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The silence in the home office felt entirely different now. It was no longer the silence of a victim being kept in the dark. It was the powerful, commanding silence of an auditor preparing to dismantle a massive fraud operation. Brad and Sydney were now stranded in a golden cage floating aimlessly across the ocean. They could eat caviar and sleep on Egyptian cotton sheets, but they were completely blind to the reality unfolding back home. Brad could not monitor his spoofed virtual private network to ensure his fake alibi was holding up. He could not log into his bank accounts to verify his stolen funds. He was entirely deaf, dumb, and blind. "They have exactly 7 days at sea," Devin stated, his voice ringing with absolute determination. 7 days where they cannot make a single phone call, transfer a single dollar, or respond to a single corporate inquiry. They are paralyzed. 7 days is an eternity in the financial world, I replied, my mind structuring the timeline for our counterattack. We have 1 week of absolute silence from our targets. We have their bank records, their corporate wire transfers, and the exact location data proving Brad abandoned his post to commit federal wire fraud. We are going to use this window to execute a flawless, coordinated strike on every single aspect of their lives. Devin reached out and closed the lid of Brad's personal laptop with a sharp, decisive snap. He secured his flash drive. We had extracted all the digital venom we needed from that machine. Right now, it was time to synthesize the ultimate antidote. I turned to my own silver laptop and opened the encrypted whistleblower document I had created earlier. The blank page stared back at me, ready to be filled with the precise, undeniable mathematics of my husband's complete destruction. Brad truly thought he had left me completely powerless in a quiet suburban home. He would very soon learn that absolute quiet is incredibly dangerous. The next 48 hours became an absolute masterclass in forensic accounting. We did not leave the upstairs home office. We did not sleep. We barely even spoke unless it was to verify a specific data point or cross-reference a hidden transaction identifier. Devin and I functioned as a perfectly synchronized unit, driven entirely by a shared burning need to dismantle the liars who had decimated our lives. I pulled every single bank statement, every wire transfer receipt, and every digital invoice Brad had submitted to his corporate procurement portal. My computer screen rapidly transformed into a complex grid of undeniable financial ruin. I tracked the flow of cash from his corporate employer directly into the phantom bank accounts of Apex Holdings. Brad thought he was incredibly clever by varying the invoice amounts. He submitted requests for strategic regional consulting or market analysis expansion, always keeping the dollar figures just below the automatic executive review threshold. It was textbook embezzlement, but it was incredibly sloppy for someone operating at a senior director level. He relied entirely on the blind assumption that nobody would ever look closely at a top-performing sales director and his operational budget. I painstakingly mapped each fraudulent corporate payout to the corresponding deposits in the shell company account. From there, I drew a hard, undeniable line straight to the massive escrow payments for the Miami penthouse. I cross-referenced the financial records with Devon's geolocation data, proving Brad was sitting comfortably in my parents' living room when he initiated the largest illicit transfers. The narrative wrote itself. It was a comprehensive map of a multi-level federal crime. But having the data was only half the battle. I knew exactly how ruthless corporate defense attorneys could be when protecting high-level executives. If Brad sensed even a sliver of vulnerability in our evidence, he would instantly claim his devices were hacked. He would say a malicious third party infiltrated his home network and framed him. He would play the victim. I absolutely refused to give him that opportunity. We needed an impenetrable digital vault. Devon handled the digital chain of custody with terrifying precision. He knew that the moment I walked into Brad's corporate headquarters, their legal team would demand strict verification of the source material. Devon utilized professional forensic cloning software to create an exact bit-for-bit replica of Brad's hard drive. This process ensured that the original metadata remained absolutely pristine and legally admissible in a federal court. He generated cryptographic hash values for every single exported email, every fake invoice, and every intercepted geolocated photograph from the luxury cruise ship. A hash value acts as a unique digital fingerprint for a file. If Brad's high-priced lawyers tried to argue that we had altered the documents or photoshopped the cruise ship receipts, the hash values would instantly prove that the files were completely untouched and authentic. Devon packaged all the raw data onto a highly secure encrypted solid-state drive. He documented the exact timestamp of the extraction the methodology used and the hardware specifications, creating a flawless forensic report that any federal investigator would drool over. As Sunday bled heavily into Monday, the physical toll of our marathon session began to severely set in. Empty coffee cups and crumpled takeout wrappers littered the edges of the wooden desk. My eyes burned furiously from staring at the harsh glare of the dual monitors, and my back ached from sitting in the exact same rigid position. But the adrenaline surging through my veins completely masked the exhaustion. I was not just an angry wife looking for petty revenge. I was a senior internal auditor executing the most important financial investigation of my entire career. Every time my focus threatened to waver, I looked directly over at the printed receipt for the $25,000 cruise ticket funded entirely by my stolen life savings. That single piece of paper fueled my absolute determination. Devon worked tirelessly right beside me, his own quiet fury driving him to strictly secure every single digital lock. He compiled the hack records from Sydney's private social media, capturing her arrogant videos and her brazen admissions of guilt. We merged his technical data with my financial audit, fusing them into a singular, devastating weapon. By Monday evening, the final report was complete. I pressed the print button and listened as the heavy laser printer hummed to life. Page after page of undeniable proof slid into the output tray. It took nearly 20 minutes for the machine to process the entire document. When it finally finished, I gathered the massive stack of paper. 200 pages of meticulously organized, cross-referenced, heavily verified evidence. The dossier detailed the creation of the fraudulent shell company, the exact dates and amounts of the embezzled corporate funds, the theft of my personal savings, the purchase of the luxury penthouse, and the complicit involvement of my parents as financial guarantors. It also included the geolocated proof of Brad currently utilizing a stolen upgrade on a luxury cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. I bound the pages together with heavy binder clips, feeling the physical weight of my husband's total destruction resting heavily in my hands. I walked over to the closet and pulled out my sharpest, most professional black leather briefcase. I carefully placed the 200-page dossier inside right next to the encrypted solid-state drive Devin had prepared. I snapped the brass lock shut with a sharp, decisive click. The trap was fully constructed, loaded, and ready to be deployed. I sat back down at the desk and picked up my phone. As a senior auditor in the financial sector, I possess the direct contact information for several high-level executives across the industry. I bypassed the standard corporate reception desk and dialed the private direct line for the executive assistant to the chief executive officer of Brad's company. The assistant answered immediately, her tone crisp and professional. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I identified myself by my full name and professional title. I stated that I had uncovered a massive, ongoing internal financial fraud operation directly involving a senior director at their firm. I informed her that the stolen amount exceeded nearly $500,000 and that I possessed physical and digital proof ready for immediate federal turnover. I requested an emergency off-the-books meeting with the CEO and their chief legal counsel for exactly 8 o'clock the following morning. The assistant placed me on a brief, tense hold. When she returned to the line, her voice was completely devoid of its former warmth. "The CEO will see you tomorrow at 8 sharp," she confirmed. I hung up the phone, my grip tightening on the leather handle of the briefcase. The absolute quiet was over. It was time to go to war. I walked directly to the table, bypassed the offered pleasantries, and placed my heavy briefcase squarely on the polished wood. I unlatched the brass locks with 2 sharp clicks and pulled out the 200-page dossier, placing it directly in front of Jonathan. Next, I set the encrypted solid-state drive Devin had prepared right beside it. "Good morning," I said, my voice projecting absolute emotionless authority. "My name is Brenda. I am a senior internal auditor, and I am here to present irrefutable evidence of a massive ongoing financial fraud operation currently being executed by one of your senior sales directors, Brad." Jonathan stared at me, slightly taken aback by my incredibly direct approach. He glanced at Diane, who leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the thick stack of documents. "You claimed on the phone that $500,000 has been stolen," Jonathan stated, his tone cautious. "Those are very heavy allegations to make against a top-performing director. We run strict internal audits quarterly. If money was missing, our compliance software would have caught it. Your compliance software is designed to catch anomalies in standard billing cycles," I countered, immediately tapping the cover of the dossier. "It is not designed to catch a senior executive deliberately circumventing manual approval thresholds by utilizing a phantom vendor. Open the file to page 4. Jonathan slowly opened the binder. Diane leaned over his shoulder. I did not wait for them to read. I delivered the facts with surgical precision. 8 months ago, Brad created a shell company named Apex Holdings, LLC. He utilized his executive clearance to manually add this entity to your approved vendor database under the guise of regional market analysis consulting. Because his departmental budget allows him to approve individual invoices up to $20,000 without secondary executive sign-off, he has been submitting fake invoices just below that specific threshold. He has systematically drained nearly $350,000 of Vanguard corporate funds directly into a ghost account he completely controls." Diane rapidly flipped to the section containing the raw data Devin and I had extracted. She looked at the printed IP addresses, the geolocation tags, and the time-stamped wire transfers. Her eyes widened as she recognized the sheer level of forensic detail provided. "These are verified digital fingerprints." I continued, my tone completely devoid of emotion. "The solid-state drive contains the exact cryptographic hash values proving the chain of custody. You will see that the IP address used to file the state incorporation documents for Apex Holdings perfectly matches the residential network where Brad initiated the illicit wire transfers. He used the stolen corporate funds, combined with my own stolen personal savings, to outright purchase $1 million luxury penthouse in Miami. The deed to that property is located on page 42. Jonathan quickly turned to page 42. The color rapidly drained from his face as he stared at the finalized real estate contract, confirming the massive outflow of stolen cash. The arrogant disbelief that had shadowed his expression just moments ago completely vanished, replaced by an explosive, terrifying fury. He realized instantly that I was not a bitter wife making wild accusations. I was a lethal professional handing him a fully completed federal investigation on a silver platter. Diane immediately pulled out her corporate laptop and logged into Vanguard's internal procurement system. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence as her fingers flew across her keyboard, verifying my claims against their own live database. Less than 2 minutes later, Diane looked up, her face pale and rigid. "The vendor profile exists, Jonathan," she confirmed, her voice tight with alarm. "The invoice approvals match her spreadsheet exactly. He has been actively overriding the procurement flags by labeling them as priority executive requests. The money is completely gone." Jonathan slammed his hand violently against the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the massive boardroom. A senior director actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars right under my nose. Jonathan practically snarled, his anger completely boiling over. He used our own operational budget as his personal piggy bank for real estate investments. "Where is he right now?" Diane asked, looking directly at me, her legal mind instantly shifting toward asset recovery and prosecution. I looked back at her with a cold, ruthless smile. "He is currently trapped on a luxury cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean Sea," I replied smoothly. "He stole $25,000 from my personal savings account to take his pregnant mistress on a vacation. He is completely isolated from all cellular and wireless networks. He has absolutely no idea that this meeting is taking place." Jonathan stood up from his leather chair, pacing the length of the boardroom. The sheer audacity of the crime had ignited a firestorm within the corporate executive. He marched over to the internal phone on the conference table and hit a speed dial button for the Human Resources Department. "Bring me Brad's employment contract and an immediate termination with cause authorization form right now," Jonathan barked into the receiver. "I do not care what he is currently working on. Bring it to the boardroom this exact second." Jonathan slammed the phone down and turned back to Diane. He pointed a shaking finger at the massive pile of evidence I had provided. "Get the white-collar crime division of the FBI on the phone right now." Jonathan ordered his chief counsel, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Hand over every single page of this dossier to the federal investigators. I want all his company assets completely seized. And tell the federal authorities exactly which cruise port he is returning to. The very second that thief steps his foot back onto United States soil, I want federal warrants executed, and I want him leaving that terminal in handcuffs." I left the corporate boardroom feeling a massive surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline pumping through my veins. Jonathan and Diane were already moving at warp speed behind me, coordinating heavily with federal authorities and drafting the immediate termination notices for their disgraced executive. Right before I walked out of the heavy glass doors, Diane handed me a certified copy of the preliminary corporate fraud filing. It was complete with the official case number they had just generated with the federal investigators. This single piece of paper was my absolute golden ticket. It was the exact legal leverage I needed to completely sever my husband from every single dollar he thought he controlled. Devin was waiting for me outside, leaning against the passenger side of my car, with his arms firmly crossed. The sharp, determined look on my face told him everything he needed to know. The corporate strike had been absolutely flawless. We did not waste time celebrating. We simply exchanged a firm nod and got straight into the vehicle. The next phase of our operation required absolute urgency. Brad had already drained our joint life savings account, but he still maintained access to our shared checking, multiple joint credit lines, and the automated payment systems tied to his newly purchased luxury penthouse. If I did not act immediately, his scheduled payments would continue to bleed my financial future dry. As Devin drove us quickly toward the downtown financial district, he opened his laptop and monitored the live pings on Brad's remaining accounts. Brad had set up automated drafts to cover the homeowner association fees for the Miami penthouse and the monthly retainer for the ghost shell company. We could not allow a single cent of that money to leave the bank. We pulled up to the main branch of our primary financial institution. As a senior internal auditor, I understood the intricate legal mechanisms of asset protection better than anyone. Banks are highly risk-averse entities. When presented with documented proof of an active federal fraud investigation involving stolen funds crossing state lines, their compliance departments are legally obligated to intervene instantly to prevent further capital flight. I marched boldly through the grand glass doors of the bank, Devin walking right beside me in perfect synchronization. We bypassed the standard teller line entirely. I walked straight up to the customer service desk and requested an immediate emergency meeting with the branch manager. A tall man named Mr. Caldwell stepped out of his corner office looking slightly annoyed by the sudden aggressive demand. I did not give him a chance to dismiss us or ask us to schedule an appointment. I marched into his office, placed my identification on his desk, and dropped the certified corporate fraud filings from Diane right next to it. Then I placed the executive summary of my own financial audit dossier squarely in the center of his blotter. I clearly and firmly stated that my husband was currently the primary target of an active federal embezzlement investigation initiated by his employer. I explained that massive amounts of illicit corporate funds had been illegally commingled with our joint personal accounts and funneled into a fraudulent real estate shell company. I cited specific anti-money laundering protocols and corporate compliance regulations. I watched the color rapidly drain from Mr. Caldwell's face. Bank managers dread nothing more than their specific branch becoming entangled in a federal money laundering and wire fraud scandal. He quickly closed his office blinds, locked his door, and began reviewing the documents with trembling hands. I pointed specifically to the active wire transfers scheduled to hit the Apex Holdings account by the end of the current week. Those transfers were explicitly designed to cover the high-interest mortgage payments my parents had guaranteed. I formally invoked my legal right as the primary joint account holder to immediately freeze all shared assets. Furthermore, I filed an official fraud dispute against the $150,000 Brad had already siphoned away. This specific action triggered an automatic regulatory freeze on the destination accounts associated with the shell company. Because the funds were heavily tied to a documented federal crime and backed by Vanguard corporate counsel Caldwell had the unilateral authority to override the standard banking waiting periods. Mr. Caldwell nervously typed his administrative credentials into his keyboard, pulling up our entire financial portfolio on his dual monitors. He saw the automated drafts queued up for the Miami penthouse. He saw the rolling incidental holds actively pinging from Uncle Harrison's cruise line terminal. I instructed him to cancel every single scheduled transaction. Cancel the mortgage draft. Cancel the credit line auto payments. Put a hard, impenetrable stop on all the debit cards. I wanted a total financial lockdown. He initiated the comprehensive asset freeze protocol. Devin and I watched the reflection of the banking software dancing across Caldwell's glasses as he systematically stripped away every ounce of stolen wealth Brad had accumulated. We nullified his credit limits. We blocked his routing numbers. We effectively vaporized his entire financial infrastructure in a matter of minutes. Far away from this cold, sterile bank office, Brad was likely sitting on the sun-drenched balcony of the owner's suite. I pictured him perfectly in my mind. He was undoubtedly wearing his expensive designer sunglasses, lounging back in a plush deck chair, and taking a long sip of a premium martini. Sydney was probably sitting right beside him, rubbing her pregnant belly and admiring the sparkling Caribbean Ocean. They were completely oblivious. Because Uncle Harrison had executed the total digital blackout, they had absolutely no cellular service and no wireless network connection. Brad could not receive the frantic fraud alerts currently being blasted out by his banking applications. He truly believed he had won. He believed he was a wealthy, untouchable king floating in a luxurious paradise. Mr. Caldwell took a final heavy breath and looked at the comprehensive freeze order glowing on his monitor. He asked me for one final verbal confirmation to execute the complete lock. I gave him a cold, ruthless nod. Mr. Caldwell firmly hit the enter key on his keyboard. In that exact fraction of a second, thousands of miles away on a luxury balcony, Brad's entire financial net worth dropped to absolute zero. We walked out of the bank and into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the utter destruction of Brad's financial life sealed inside that manager's office. I took a deep breath of the crisp air, feeling a massive weight physically lift from my shoulders. But our synchronized mission was only half complete. I had successfully annihilated the man who betrayed me. Now it was Devon's turn to drop the hammer on the woman who had happily helped burn our lives to the ground. Devon did not say a word as we got back into his car. He did not need to. His quiet intelligence had always been his absolute greatest asset. While Brad and my sister Sydney operated on loud, arrogant assumptions, Devon functioned on calculated foresight. He was a master of anticipating threats and building impenetrable defense systems long before an attack ever occurred. That brilliant foresight applied to his personal life just as heavily as his corporate cybersecurity contracts. When Devon and Sydney first got engaged, my parents had secretly scoffed. They thought Devon, despite his massive tech salary, was somehow lucky to be marrying their beautiful, pampered golden child. Sydney completely internalized that toxic arrogance. She genuinely believed she was the ultimate prize, and that Devon would spend his entire life desperately clinging to her. Because of that towering, completely unearned ego, Sydney made a fatal legal miscalculation 5 years ago. When Devon politely presented her with a comprehensive prenuptial agreement before their wedding, she barely even glanced at the pages. She signed the thick legal document with a dismissive wave of her hand, laughing at the idea that she would ever need to worry about the financial terms of a divorce. She assumed Devon would never dare leave her. She failed to realize that Devon had drafted that specific contract with the exact same ruthless precision he used to protect classified defense networks. Devon dropped me off at my house so I could begin preparing the next phase of our operation. Then he drove straight downtown to a sleek, modern high-rise building. He walked into the corner office of his high-powered divorce attorney, a fierce, razor-sharp litigator who specialized in rapid asset protection. Devon sat down at the expansive glass table and calmly handed over the encrypted flash drive containing the exact same digital dossier we had compiled against Brad. But Devon had added a dedicated, highly specific subfolder completely focused on his wife. The attorney opened the files and her eyes went wide. Devon had systematically cataloged every single text message, every geolocated photograph, and every piece of audio evidence proving Sydney's prolonged infidelity. He even included the hacked medical portal confirmation of her pregnancy with Brad. He had essentially handed his lawyer a fully loaded, totally unassailable weapon. The prenuptial agreement Sydney had so carelessly signed contained an ironclad, incredibly strict infidelity clause. It explicitly dictated that in the event of documented adultery, the at-fault party would immediately forfeit all rights to spousal support, absolutely all claims to any shared marital assets and any equity in the primary residence. Devon instructed his attorney to file an emergency at-fault divorce petition with the family court that exact same afternoon. Because Sydney had actively abandoned her marital home to board a luxury cruise ship funded entirely by stolen money, and because she was openly broadcasting her affair while residing in a suite purchased through a federal wire fraud scheme, the legal leverage was astronomically high. Devon's attorney filed an emergency motion for exclusive use and possession of the marital property, citing the massive financial and legal liabilities Sydney had recklessly invited into their lives. The presiding judge reviewed the overwhelming, incredibly thorough digital evidence and signed the emergency protective order without a single moment of hesitation. Armed with the freshly stamped court order, Devon drove straight back to the sprawling modern house he had purchased entirely with his own money before he ever met Sydney. For years, she had treated that beautiful home like her own personal castle, filling the closets with expensive designer clothes and demanding constant, costly renovations to impress her vapid social circle. She walked around those hardwood floors like royalty, completely taking Devon's quiet, steady provision for granted. Devon did not shed a tear as he walked through the quiet rooms. He operated with cold, mechanical efficiency. He picked up his phone and called a professional rapid response moving crew. He did not hire them to carefully pack her delicate items into padded boxes. He paid them a premium cash rate for speed and total clearance. When the crew arrived, Devon handed them boxes of heavy-duty black industrial garbage bags. He instructed them to sweep through the master bedroom, the lavish walk-in closet, and the luxury master bathroom. He stood in the hallway, his arms firmly crossed, and watched with cold satisfaction as the crew indiscriminately swept thousands of dollars of designer dresses, expensive handbags, and premium cosmetics directly into the thick plastic bags. They tossed in the expensive shoes she had bought using the money Brad stole from me. They shoved her imported perfumes and silk scarves into the dark sacks until her entire carefully curated, highly expensive life was reduced to a mountain of black trash bags piled high in the center of the driveway. While the crew worked inside, Devon supervised a specialized local locksmith. He had the technician strip every single lock off the front door, the back patio, and the garage entry. He replaced them with high-security commercial-grade electronic keypads synced directly and exclusively to his personal biometric data. He completely wiped her access codes from the smart home infrastructure and severed her connection to the localized security cameras. He effectively erased her entire existence from the property. Devon stood on the front porch as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon. He looked at the massive pile of trash bags waiting unceremoniously on the concrete driveway. He held the emergency court order firmly in his hand. Sydney was currently trapped on a ship laughing and drinking champagne, utterly convinced she was returning to a life of guaranteed luxury. She had absolutely no idea that her husband had just legally and physically locked her out of her own life. She was completely stripped of her home, her safety net, and her marriage. She was officially homeless. While Devon secured his perimeter and erased Sydney from his property, my own meticulous preparation entered its final, most devastating phase. Devon had successfully dismantled the safety net my sister relied upon, but I needed to completely destroy the foundation of arrogance that allowed her to thrive. That foundation was entirely maintained by my parents. Patricia and Richard were the architects of this toxic entitlement. They had spent their entire lives treating their home equity like an endless, magical, automated teller machine, constantly pulling cash out to maintain a hollow country club facade. My parents possessed zero actual financial literacy. They judged a person's worth exclusively by the designer logos on their clothing and the luxury badge on their car. When Brad approached them with his fraudulent shell company scheme, they did not ask to see a business plan. They did not request to review his tax filings or his debt-to-income ratio. They only saw a wealthy son-in-law offering to buy their golden child a beachfront penthouse. Blinded by their own obsession with keeping up appearances, they eagerly signed away the deed to their sprawling estate. They happily chained their financial future to an aggressive, predatory second mortgage, absolutely convinced that Brad would easily cover the massive monthly payments. They never bothered to read the fine print of the loan agreement, but I had read every single word. Early Tuesday morning, I drove into the heart of the financial district. I walked into the sleek glass-walled lobby of Vanguard Capital Partners. This was the boutique private investment firm holding the paper on my parents' incredibly risky second mortgage. I did not walk in cold. I had previously audited several major accounts for this exact firm, and I maintained a strong professional relationship with their senior portfolio manager, Mitchell. He was a ruthless, mathematically driven executive who cared only about mitigating risk and protecting his firm's bottom line. I sat down in Mitchell's corner office, placing a heavily redacted version of my investigative dossier directly onto his desk. I did not waste his time with personal family drama. I spoke to him strictly as a senior auditor warning a colleague about an impending financial disaster. Mitchell, the second mortgage your firm recently underwrote for Patricia and Richard is entirely backed by a fraudulent corporate entity, I stated, my voice echoing with cold authority. The primary payer on that loan is a ghost company named Apex Holdings. By tomorrow morning, the federal authorities will officially seize all assets connected to that account due to a massive corporate embezzlement investigation. Mitchell stared at the paperwork, his professional demeanor instantly shifting into high alert. He quickly pulled up the loan file on his monitor, his eyes scanning the payment structure and the guarantor details. The primary payers will be federally indicted by the end of the week. I continued seamlessly. The automatic payments scheduled to hit your accounts will bounce. That leaves the financial burden entirely on the guarantors Patricia and Richard. As an auditor who has seen their comprehensive financial profile, I can absolutely guarantee you they do not possess the liquid capital to cover a single month of this premium loan. This debt is about to become an incredibly toxic, non-performing asset on your quarterly balance sheet. Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, a deep frown forming on his face. If the primary entity is seized by the federal government executing a standard foreclosure, on the guarantors will be a bureaucratic nightmare. It will tie up our legal department for months, maybe years. Why are you bringing this directly to me, Brenda? Because I am offering you an immediate, completely clean exit strategy, I replied, sliding a brand new legal folder across his desk. I have just established a private anonymous financial trust. My trust is fully capitalized and ready to execute an immediate cash-backed portfolio transfer. I want to purchase this specific debt from your firm right now. I will buy the promissory note at a 5% discount. You get to instantly clear a highly toxic asset off your books before the federal investigation triggers a massive compliance headache, and your firm walks away without taking a significant public loss. Mitchell was a shark, but he was a pragmatic shark. He knew exactly what a federal freeze order would do to his administrative costs. Selling a high-risk debt to a private trust was a standard, perfectly legal financial maneuver in the private equity sector. He recognized the profound mutual benefit of my aggressive offer. He picked up his desk phone and immediately called his chief legal officer to draft the transfer assignment. For the next 3 hours, I sat in that glass office meticulously reviewing the dense legal contracts. I transferred a massive portion of my own clean, securely guarded personal investments into the newly formed trust account. I utilized the heavy commissions and bonuses I had quietly saved over my entire auditing career, money my husband never knew existed because it was locked safely in a separate corporate holding account. I was literally liquidating my own safety net to purchase the weapon that would destroy my parents, and I did not feel a single shred of hesitation. The corporate lawyers brought the final stack of documents into the office. The transfer was completely airtight. The promissory note, along with all the aggressive default clauses and predatory foreclosure rights, would be fully assigned to my private trust. Mitchell signed the transfer authorization on behalf of his firm, officially selling the debt. He pushed the heavy stack of paper across the polished wood table toward me. He handed me a sleek, heavy silver pen. I stared down at the signature line. This was the exact moment the power dynamic of my entire family history completely and permanently inverted. For 33 years, my parents had lorded their house and their perceived wealth over my head. They used their property as a symbol of their superiority, constantly reminding me that I was merely a guest in their perfect upper-class world. They had gladly leveraged that same house to fund my sister's stolen luxury, fully expecting me to quietly absorb the devastation. I gripped the silver pen tightly. I pressed the tip to the thick paper and signed my name with bold, undeniable, and aggressive strokes. I set the pen down. The transaction was complete. The legal reality of what I had just accomplished settled into my bones with a profound, terrifying thrill. I was no longer the discarded, overlooked older daughter. I was no longer the victim of their toxic financial manipulation. I picked up the finalized contract. I was now officially my parents' sole undisputed creditor. I owned the paper on their sprawling estate. I held the absolute legal right to their entire future. The loan contract contained a strict, unforgiving acceleration clause. The very second the payment from Brad's frozen shell company failed to clear the entire balance of the massive loan would become immediately due. If Patricia and Richard missed a single solitary payment, I held the absolute legal authority to aggressively foreclose on their pristine mansion, seize their most prized asset, and forcefully evict them onto the street. I returned home with the legal portfolio secured safely in my briefcase. I laid the financial documents squarely on my kitchen island, smoothing my hand over the pages representing absolute control over my parents' future. I did not have to wait long for the inevitable fallout. It was Wednesday morning, the day Brad scheduled the automated mortgage draft to clear the Apex Holdings shell account. Because I successfully froze his assets and flagged the account for federal wire fraud 24 hours prior, I knew the transaction would bounce. The financial shockwave was currently rippling through the banking system, heading straight for my parents' pristine estate. I walked into my home office and connected my smartphone to a digital audio recorder to capture every single word of the incoming assault. I poured black coffee, sat at my desk, and stared at the silent phone. The clock clicked to 10:30. My screen lit up. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I pressed accept and activated the recording software with a sharp tap. "Brenda, you need to go to your bank, right? This exact second," Patricia barked into the receiver. She did not ask how I was doing after dropping the massive bombshell about my husband and sister. Her voice was shrill, laced with panic. "There has been a catastrophic glitch with the financial transfers." I leaned back, keeping my voice incredibly light. "A glitch?" I asked, playing the role of the naive daughter she expected me to be. "What kind of glitch, Mom? Is everything okay with your accounts?" "It is not our accounts." Patricia snapped, her breath hitching with frustration. "It is Brad's business account. He set up an automated wire transfer to cover the escrow and the mortgage payment for Sydney's new apartment down in Miami. The bank just called your father and told him the payment was aggressively rejected. They said the account was locked. We cannot reach Brad at all. He is not answering his cell phone, and his corporate office is completely stonewalling us. Your father is having a massive panic attack in the living room." I took a slow sip of my coffee, relishing the sheer panic radiating through the speaker. "Brad told me he was going into a strict communication blackout for his big project," I replied, feeding her the exact lie she had happily endorsed just days prior. "He probably just triggered a fraud alert by moving so much cash around." "I do not care about algorithms, Brenda," Patricia yelled, the desperation completely overriding her usual country club restraint. "The payment failed. Because your father and I co-signed the guarantor agreement to secure the property, the investment firm is holding us personally liable for the immediate balance. If the funds do not clear by tomorrow morning, they are going to hit us with a massive default penalty. You need to wire us $30,000 right now to bridge the gap until Brad gets his phone turned back on." I stared at the promissory note resting on my desk. I owned the exact debt she was currently screaming about. I was the private investor holding the absolute legal right to her financial destruction. I kept my tone perfectly even, encouraging her to dig her grave even deeper on the recorded line. "Mom, you want me to wire you $30,000 from my personal savings to cover a mortgage payment for a luxury penthouse that Brad bought for Sydney?" I asked, making sure to clearly enunciate every single aspect of her fraudulent demand. "You want me to fund the apartment where my sister is hiding out with my husband?" Patricia let out a harsh, bitter scoff. "Do not make this about your fragile ego, Brenda. This is about family survival. Brad is providing a beautiful life for your sister and your future niece or nephew. The least you can do is step up and support them during a minor banking error. You have always been so utterly selfish with your money. You hoard your auditor's salary while your sister actually lives her life. Transfer the funds right now, or your father and I will face severe financial penalties." "You are asking me to aid in hiding assets," I pressed, making sure the audio recorder captured her absolute lack of remorse. "You are demanding that I drain my own accounts to protect a shell company setup." "I am demanding that you fulfill your obligation to this family," Patricia roared, completely abandoning any remaining shred of decency. Her mask slipped, entirely exposing the vicious, toxic narcissism that had ruled our household for 3 decades. "You have always been jealous of Sydney. You have always resented her beauty, her charm, and her ability to attract a successful man like Brad. You are a boring, rigid, unlovable numbers drone. Brad realized he made a massive mistake marrying you. He chose a woman who actually knows how to make him feel alive. You should be down on your knees thanking us for giving you a chance to quietly exit this marriage without a public humiliation. I let her vicious words echo through the quiet office. In the past, those insults would have cut me to the bone. Today, they felt completely hollow. They were just desperate, pathetic noises coming from a woman who had absolutely no idea she was already financially dead. "I cannot send you the money, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising chill. "I will not fund your fraud. I will not protect your assets. And I will certainly not pay for the penthouse where my husband is currently sleeping with my sister." The line went dead silent for 2 heavy seconds. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was a venomous, hysterical shriek that distorted the audio levels on my recording software. "You miserable, spiteful failure!" Patricia screamed, unleashing decades of toxic rage. "You are dead to this family. Do you hear me, Brenda? You are absolutely dead to us. We are cutting you off forever. Do not ever call us. Do not ever show your face at our house again. You are entirely on your own." I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents resting on my desk. I reached out and gently traced my index finger over the signature line of the transferred promissory note. I looked at the aggressive default clause that gave me the unilateral right to seize her pristine mansion the very second the clock struck midnight. "I accept those terms," I replied simply, my voice completely steady and ruthlessly calm. I ended the call and saved the audio file, knowing that by this time tomorrow, they would have absolutely no family, no golden child, and no house left to call their own. I powered down my recording equipment and carefully placed the digital audio file onto the encrypted solid-state drive next to the rest of the federal evidence. I packed the drive, the signed foreclosure deed, and the thick corporate fraud dossier into my leather briefcase. Devin pulled into my driveway less than an hour later. He did not honk his horn or ring the bell. He simply sent a single text message indicating he was waiting outside. I locked the front door of my house, the exact house my parents had arrogantly demanded I surrender to my cheating husband and spoiled sister, and walked out into the cool evening air. Devin stood by his sleek car. He had booked us 2 first-class tickets on the next direct flight to Miami. We bypassed the standard airport security lines with his fast-track clearance and settled into the wide leather seats of the first-class cabin. The flight was incredibly quiet. We did not need to exchange anxious chatter or offer each other empty platitudes. We communicated through a shared, unbreakable resolve. I looked over at Devin as he reviewed the final digital divorce filings on his secure tablet. My parents had constantly undermined him, dismissing his brilliant cybersecurity career and looking down on him simply because he did not fit their narrow, prejudiced country club mold. They had treated this intelligent, fiercely loyal African-American man as a mere accessory to Sydney's life. Now he was the sole architect of her absolute ruin. I felt a profound sense of respect for him. We had both been the discarded outsiders in that toxic family dynamic, expected to quietly finance and support the golden child's destructive whims. Tonight we were flying south to permanently end their reign. We landed in Miami just after midnight. The humid tropical air wrapped around us as we stepped into the private town car Uncle Harrison had sent to the tarmac. We drove straight to the global headquarters of his luxury cruise line empire. The massive glass skyscraper dominated the port skyline, a shining monument to the exact kind of relentless hard work and integrity my parents completely lacked. The security team escorted us directly to the top floor. Uncle Harrison was waiting for us in his expansive executive office. The room was breathtaking, featuring wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the dark, sprawling port below. Harrison stood behind his massive oak desk. He did not offer a polite, sorrowful greeting or ask if I was doing okay. He walked straight over and pulled me into a tight, fierce hug. It was the embrace of a man who recognized a survivor. He then turned to Devin, extending his hand. Harrison looked Devin right in the eye, gripping his hand with absolute respect. "You are a brilliant man, Devin," Harrison said, his gruff voice echoing in the quiet office. "My sister and her husband were absolute fools to ever underestimate you. You protected your assets, you secured the digital evidence, and you handled my niece's betrayal with the exact precision of a military general. It is an absolute honor to finally have you at my table." Devin accepted the handshake, his posture straightening. The mutual respect between these two highly successful self-made men was immediate and palpable. We sat down around Harrison's polished conference table, spreading out the physical documents and booting up Devin's encrypted tablet. The next few hours were dedicated to pure tactical logistics. We were not leaving a single legal loophole or physical escape route for Brad and Sydney. Harrison opened a secure communication line with the Miami Port Authority and the lead investigator from the Federal White-Collar Crime Division. Because Brad had utilized interstate wire transfers to embezzle corporate funds and purchase real estate, the federal marshals had taken full jurisdiction over the arrest. They did not want a chaotic public spectacle in the main terminal that could endanger other passengers. Harrison utilized his immense corporate leverage to clear a highly secure private disembarkation lane specifically for the owner's suite guests. "Let us review the sequence of execution," Harrison commanded, pointing to the meticulously arranged stacks of paper on the table. "The ship docks at exactly 6 a.m. My security personnel will personally escort Brad and Sydney off the vessel and route them directly into the private customs corridor. They will think they are receiving standard VIP treatment. They will have absolutely no idea the corridor is a sealed holding area." I slid the first stack of papers forward. "I will hand Brad his official corporate termination letter." I stated, my voice cold and steady. "I want him to know that his career is entirely over before the federal marshals step out from the adjoining room to execute the arrest warrant. He needs to understand that I was the auditor who triggered his downfall." Devin tapped his finger against the second stack of legal documents. "While the feds are reading him his rights, my process servers will hand Sydney the emergency at fault divorce decree. She will also receive the finalized eviction notice, proving she is completely legally barred from my property." I placed the final, heaviest document on top of the pile, the promissory note. "And when my parents inevitably arrive at the port to try and rescue their golden child from this disaster, I will hand them the official notice of foreclosure. I will inform them that their bank rejected Brad's stolen money, triggered the default clause, and transferred their debt directly to my private trust. They will learn they have 30 days to vacate my new property." We finalized the remaining security protocols and confirmed the positioning of the process servers. As the intense planning session concluded, a comfortable, profound silence settled over the room. I looked at Devin and Uncle Harrison. We were an unlikely trio: an auditor, a cybersecurity expert, and a billionaire cruise line owner. Yet sitting in that executive office, I felt a sense of belonging I had never once experienced in my childhood home. This was my true family. We were bound not by toxic bloodlines or forced obligations, but by mutual respect, shared integrity, and an uncompromising demand for justice. The deep black sky outside the expansive windows slowly began to shift into a bruised purple, then a vibrant burning orange. The night had passed. We stood up and walked toward the glass, looking out over the waking city. The massive floodlights of the port terminal illuminated the docking bays. The morning sun rose brilliantly over Miami, casting long, sharp shadows across the water. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, we watched the horizon intently. Slowly emerging from the morning mist, Harrison's massive multi-million-dollar cruise ship appeared. It cut through the calm ocean waters, gliding gracefully toward the port. The massive vessel carried thousands of happy vacationers and 2 completely oblivious traders who believed they had gotten away with the perfect crime. I stood between my uncle and my friend, watching the ship inch closer to the concrete docks. The trap was ready to spring. The massive steel hull of the cruise ship groaned against the heavy rubber bumpers of the dock. Thick mooring lines were thrown out and secured by the ground crew anchoring the floating palace to the Miami mainland. From our vantage point in Uncle Harrison's executive office, we had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire disembarkation process. The early morning sunlight glinted off the pristine white paint of the vessel, but the atmosphere inside the office was as cold and sharp as a scalpel. Uncle Harrison stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a sleek radio clipped to his belt. He pressed the transmission button and gave a series of rapid-coded instructions to his chief of security. The regular passengers were to be routed through the main customs terminal, funneled into the standard crowded processing lines. The guests occupying the owner's suite, however, were to be given the absolute highest level of priority treatment. They were to be escorted down a private, completely isolated gangway that led directly into a secure enclosed VIP corridor. Devon pulled up the internal closed-circuit television feeds on his tablet, tapping into the ship's high-definition security cameras. He routed the video directly to the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on Harrison's office wall. The high-resolution footage flickered to life, showing the heavily gilded hallway outside the owner's suite. The heavy mahogany door swung open. Brad and Sydney stepped out into the corridor. My stomach did not twist. My hands did not shake. I simply watched them with the cold, detached scrutiny of an auditor observing a catastrophic liability. They looked exactly like the corporate criminals they were. Brad was dressed in a tailored, lightweight linen suit, his hair perfectly styled, an arrogant, self-satisfied smirk permanently plastered across his face. Sydney clung tightly to his arm, wearing a flowing, wildly expensive silk designer dress that I knew for a fact was purchased with my stolen savings. She sported oversized, dark designer sunglasses indoors, playing the role of the elusive, wealthy elite. They walked down the luxurious hallway with an unbearable sense of entitlement, expecting the entire world to simply bow at their feet. On the security feed, we watched Brad snap his fingers aggressively at the dedicated suite butler. He pointed to their matching set of expensive leather luggage, barking a sharp order for the bags to be carried down to the port immediately. He did not offer a tip or a word of gratitude. He simply turned his back on the staff member and continued his triumphant march toward the elevators. Sydney pulled out her smartphone, tapping the screen with a highly visible look of irritation. We could not hear their conversation, but her body language was incredibly easy to read. She was complaining about the total lack of cellular service. She wanted to post her final vacation photos. She wanted to check her messages and coordinate her grand arrival. Brad just laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist and kissing her cheek. He clearly dismissed the network blackout as a minor annoyance, assuring her that their perfectly curated life was waiting right on the other side of the gangway. They had absolutely no idea that their digital isolation was a deliberate, perfectly executed snare. They believed they were completely untouchable. They believed my mother Patricia had handled all the messy details on the mainland. According to the intercepted text messages Devon had pulled, Sydney was fully expecting a private chauffeured limousine to be waiting for them at the curb. Patricia had promised to arrange a luxury transport to drive them straight to their new fraudulent Miami penthouse. They were returning to claim their stolen kingdom, completely oblivious to the fact that their castle had already been entirely seized and their bank accounts drained to absolute zero. The security cameras tracked their progress as they reached the private VIP elevator. They bypassed the massive crowds of ordinary families dragging their suitcases through the main atrium. They flashed their solid gold keycards at the security personnel, demanding and receiving priority clearance. The sheer sociopathy of their behavior was staggering to witness. Brad was returning from a week of extreme luxury, fully intending to keep up the charade of his intense corporate lockdown. He planned to walk back into my house, kiss me on the cheek, and tell me how incredibly exhausted he was from working so hard for our future. He intended to keep manipulating me, keeping me completely docile while he finalized his illicit real estate transactions. He thought he was a mastermind. He thought I was just a naive, trusting wife who would never dare question his professional dedication. They stepped off the elevator and onto the private gangway reserved exclusively for high-ranking dignitaries and the ship's owner. The morning ocean breeze caught Sydney's expensive silk dress as they confidently strutted down the metal ramp. They did not look like people carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of massive federal crimes. They looked absolutely thrilled. They were laughing together, pointing at the Miami skyline, undoubtedly pointing toward the exact neighborhood where they believed their $1 million penthouse was waiting. Brad adjusted his designer watch, checking the time, entirely confident that his fake virtual private network had maintained his corporate alibi perfectly. Harrison pressed the transmission button on his radio one final time. "Bring them into holding area Beta," Harrison commanded, his voice devoid of any mercy, "and lock the perimeter doors behind them." We turned away from the security monitor and walked out of the executive office. We took the private service elevator down to the ground floor of the port terminal. Devin walked with a steady, commanding stride, his hands resting lightly in his pockets, holding the thick stack of legal devastation he was about to unleash. I carried my black leather briefcase, the silver locks gleaming under the harsh industrial lights of the terminal. We moved through the restricted employee corridors, escorted by two massive port security supervisors. Back on the security feed, Brad and Sydney reached the bottom of the gangway. The ship's security personnel respectfully guided them away from the main customs line, ushering them toward a set of heavy frosted glass doors. Brad nodded approvingly, clearly enjoying the extreme deference. He pushed the heavy glass door open for Sydney, playing the role of the perfect wealthy gentleman. They stepped past the final customs checkpoint and walked right into the isolated VIP terminal, fully expecting to see a uniformed chauffeur holding a crisp white sign with their names. The heavy frosted glass doors hissed shut behind them. The electronic locks engaged with a loud, final, echoing click. Brad and Sydney strutted forward, their designer luggage rolling smoothly across the polished concrete floor. They looked around the expansive, sterile room, their confident smiles firmly in place. They looked for the luxury treatment they believed they so rightfully deserved. But as they stepped further into the center of the room, their arrogant smiles vanished instantly. The blood completely drained from their perfectly tanned faces. There was no chauffeur, there was no limousine, there was no welcoming embrace from my toxic parents. Waiting for them under the glaring, unforgiving lights of the holding area was a solid wall of heavily armed port security guards. And standing dead center, blocking their only exit, was Uncle Harrison, Devin, and me. Waiting for them under the glaring, unforgiving lights of the holding area was a solid wall of heavily armed port security guards. And standing dead center, blocking their only exit, was Uncle Harrison, Devin, and me. Brad stopped dead in his tracks. The custom leather luggage slipped from his grip, the heavy wheels clattering loudly against the concrete floor. His arrogant posture instantly dissolved, replaced by the terrified, wide-eyed stare of a trapped animal. Beside him, Sydney gasped, her manicured hand flying to her mouth as she stumbled backward in her expensive designer heels. She instinctively tried to hide behind Brad, using him as a human shield against the devastating reality staring them down. For a fraction of a second, Brad's slick corporate survival instincts tried to override his sheer panic. He forced a painfully artificial smile onto his face, attempting to deploy the exact same manipulative charm that had fueled his entire sales career. "Brenda! Babe, what an absolute surprise!" Brad stammered, his voice cracking violently as he raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Listen, there is a perfectly logical explanation for this. The company suddenly rerouted my Chicago conference to a maritime networking event. I ran into your sister purely by coincidence at the terminal, and we just thought, do not insult my intelligence." I snapped, my voice echoing off the concrete walls like a crack of thunder. I cut off his pathetic lie with a single sharp motion of my hand. "Your spoofed virtual private network has been offline for a week. We bypassed your encrypted laptop. We downloaded your fraudulent wire transfers. We have the geolocated receipt from the upgrade you purchased with my stolen life savings. Your entire digital smokescreen has completely evaporated, Brad." Brad's mouth opened and closed silently, his fake smile shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The staggering weight of my words crushed the breath right out of his lungs. Before he could attempt to formulate another lie, Devin stepped forward. Devin did not look at my husband. His burning, intense gaze was locked entirely on the woman who had happily destroyed their marriage. Sydney shrank under his stare, trembling violently. "Devin, please." Sydney whined, her voice pitching into that sickly, sweet, victimized tone she had always used to manipulate our parents. "You have to listen to me. I was feeling so confused and vulnerable. Brad just offered me a shoulder to cry on." Devin did not say a single word to her. He did not yell. He did not demand an apology. He simply raised his hand and signaled the two men standing quietly in the shadows near the customs desk. The official process servers stepped forward with ruthless efficiency. The first server walked directly up to Sydney and shoved a thick, heavily sealed legal envelope squarely against her chest. When she reflexively grabbed it, he stepped back. "You have been officially served," the man stated with cold professionalism. Sydney stared down at the documents, her hands shaking so badly the thick pages rattled. Devon finally spoke, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. "Those are your emergency at-fault divorce papers," Devon explained, watching her perfectly contoured face contort in absolute horror. "I invoked the strict infidelity clause of the prenuptial agreement you signed so carelessly 5 years ago. You officially forfeit all rights to spousal support. You forfeit all claims to my financial assets. But do not worry about packing your things. I already took care of that for you." Devon reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and dropped it intentionally right at her feet. It was the formalized eviction notice stamped and approved by the county judge. "Every single designer dress, luxury handbag, and piece of jewelry you own is currently sitting in black industrial garbage bags at the bottom of my driveway," Devon continued mercilessly. "I stripped your biometric access from the security network and changed every single lock on the property. You no longer have a husband. You no longer have a home. You are entirely legally homeless." Sydney let out a sharp, hysterical sob, falling to her knees to grab the eviction notice. She looked like a broken porcelain doll, her entire luxurious reality completely dismantled in under 60 seconds. Brad turned to Devon, his face flushing with panicked rage. "You cannot do this to her," Brad yelled, stepping forward aggressively. "You cannot just throw a pregnant woman onto the street." Brad did not make it a second step. Uncle Harrison snapped his fingers, and the wall of armed port security guards instantly stepped forward, their hands resting menacingly on their tactical belts. Brad froze, his pathetic bravado vanishing the second he faced actual physical consequences. I stepped right in front of him. I unlatched my black leather briefcase and pulled out the crisp, heavy stock paper bearing the official letterhead of Vanguard Capital Partners. I shoved the document directly into Brad's chest, forcing him to take it. "You should be far more concerned about your own housing situation, Brad," I stated, my eyes locking onto his with absolute freezing contempt. "Because where you are going, the government provides the accommodations. That is your official termination letter. Signed personally by your chief executive officer at 8 o'clock on Monday morning." Brad stared at the corporate seal, his eyes darting frantically across the termination clauses. "You are fired with absolute cause," I explained, dismantling his massive ego piece by piece. "I personally handed your executive board the complete audit of your Phantom Shell company. They know all about Apex Holdings. They know you embezzled over $350,000 in corporate funds to buy a penthouse for your mistress. And they know you stole another $150,000 from our joint savings. I froze all of your personal banking accounts while you were sipping martinis on that balcony. Your net worth is absolutely zero." Brad's breathing became rapid and shallow. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the enclosed terminal as he frantically searched for a non-existent exit. I stepped back and nodded to Uncle Harrison. Harrison signaled the heavy steel doors leading to the main Port Authority offices. The doors swung open, and 4 federal agents from the White Collar Crime Division stepped into the harsh light, their badges gleaming brightly on their tactical vests. "Bradley, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud and interstate corporate embezzlement," the lead federal marshal announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority. The agents moved with terrifying speed. They grabbed Brad by the arms, spinning him around forcefully. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists, the sharp metallic sound echoing through the cavernous room. The physical reality of federal prison finally crashed down on him. The arrogant, untouchable executive had been entirely reduced to a trembling, handcuffed criminal in less than 5 minutes. As the marshals began dragging him forcefully toward the exit, Brad completely lost his mind. His pristine facade shattered into absolute desperation. He twisted his head back, screaming frantically at the woman kneeling on the floor. Sydney Brad shrieked, his voice echoing with raw panic. "Call the real estate broker. Cancel the penthouse closing. Liquidate the escrow funds and wire the cash to my defense lawyers. You have to pay my legal fees. Get the money right now." Sydney scrambled on the concrete floor. Because the ship had docked, her smartphone had finally reconnected to the mainland cellular towers. She desperately opened her mobile banking application, her shaking fingers smearing the glass screen as she tried to access the massive sums of stolen cash Brad had promised her. She furiously refreshed the application, expecting to see the hundreds of thousands of dollars they had routed through the shell company. Instead, the screen loaded a bright red security warning. The balance on the screen updated. The numbers stared back at her, confirming her absolute total ruin. She realized with a suffocating wave of pure terror that she was absolutely completely broke. Sydney dropped her smartphone onto the hard concrete floor, the screen cracking under the impact. She let out a guttural, suffocating wail as the reality of her financial destruction washed over her. She was not a wealthy penthouse owner. She was not the pampered partner of a high-rolling executive. She was a homeless, penniless accomplice to a federal crime kneeling in the middle of a cold customs terminal. Just as the heavy steel doors closed behind the federal marshals hauling Brad away, a loud commotion erupted near the main entrance of the VIP holding area. The massive frosted glass doors were violently pushed open. My parents, Patricia and Richard, burst into the terminal completely out of breath and frantic. They had booked a private charter flight to Miami the previous night, driven by absolute panic after their bank issued the final default warning on the Miami penthouse loan. They came rushing to the port to intercept the cruise ship, desperately hoping to find Brad and force him to wire the money to save their sprawling estate. Patricia frantically scanned the room. Her eyes darted past the armed port security guards and landed squarely on Sydney, who was still weeping uncontrollably on the floor next to her pile of useless designer luggage. Then Patricia saw Devon standing tall with his arms crossed. Finally, her enraged gaze locked directly onto me. Instead of rushing to comfort her golden child, Patricia charged straight toward me. Her face was distorted with an ugly, venomous fury. She had spent her entire life controlling the narrative, dictating the terms of our family dynamic, and punishing me whenever I stepped out of line. She saw her carefully constructed world collapsing and instantly decided that I was the sole cause of her misery. "You did this," Patricia screamed, her voice echoing wildly across the cavernous terminal. She closed the distance between us with terrifying speed. "You ruined your sister. You ruined everything." Patricia raised her right hand high into the air, fully intending to slap me across the face in front of the entire port security team. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply stood my ground, my eyes locked onto hers with absolute freezing defiance. But the strike never landed. Uncle Harrison moved with a sudden explosive speed that defied his age. He stepped firmly in front of me, raising his massive forearm and forcefully blocking Patricia's descending hand. He shoved her arm away with a harsh, aggressive motion that sent my mother stumbling backward in sheer shock. Richard rushed forward to catch his wife, his face pale and sweating under the terminal lights. "Do not ever attempt to lay a hand on my niece again," Harrison roared, his voice booming with the immense, terrifying authority of a man who commanded thousands of employees. "You are an absolute disgrace, Patricia. You are a toxic, vile excuse for a mother, and I am entirely finished watching you destroy this family." Patricia clutched her wrist, staring up at her older brother in absolute bewilderment. "Harrison," she stammered, her arrogant facade cracking under his fierce reprimand. "Brenda orchestrated this entire disaster. She had Brad arrested. She is leaving Sydney with nothing. You have to help us." Harrison took a step forward, towering over his sister and her cowardly husband. "I helped Brenda orchestrate this entire operation," Harrison stated coldly, watching the horrifying realization dawn on Patricia's face. "I personally locked that embezzling thief inside my suite and cut his network access so Brenda could legally dismantle your fraudulent schemes. I read the audit report, Patricia. I saw the wire transfers. I know exactly how you leveraged your own home to act as a financial guarantor for stolen money, simply because you wanted to fund Sydney's pathetic entitlement." Richard tried to intervene, raising his hands defensively. "Harrison, please be reasonable. We are family. We were just trying to help our youngest daughter secure a stable future." "You do not know the definition of family," Harrison snapped, completely cutting Richard off. You spent 33 years treating Brenda like an unwanted burden while you spoiled a daughter who actively slept with her own brother-in-law. You aided and abetted a federal criminal just to keep up your pathetic country club appearances. Well, your precious social standing ends today. Harrison pulled his radio from his belt, his eyes never leaving Patricia. I am officially removing you from the family trust, Harrison declared, executing his final judgment. I am permanently revoking your access to my corporate network, my legal counsel, and my financial resources. I will personally ensure every board member at your country club knows exactly how you facilitated federal wire fraud. You are utterly excommunicated from this family, Patricia. You have absolutely nothing left. Patricia let out a ragged, trembling gasp. She collapsed against Richard, the sheer magnitude of Harrison's banishment finally breaking her arrogant spirit. She turned her desperate, tear-filled eyes back toward me, silently pleading for mercy. I calmly stepped around Uncle Harrison. I opened my black leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out the crisp, legally binding foreclosure documents generated by my newly formed private trust. I walked directly up to my parents and shoved the heavy stack of papers squarely against Richard's chest. Because Brad was just arrested by the FBI, all of his financial assets have been seized by the federal government. I explained, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The automated payments for the penthouse you guaranteed have permanently failed. You are in total irrecoverable default. Richard stared blindly at the legal documents in his hands. The bank is going to take our house, he whispered, his voice shaking with absolute terror. The bank does not own your debt anymore, I corrected smoothly, delivering the ultimate devastating blow. I purchased your toxic loan from Vanguard Capital Partners yesterday morning, using my own private funds. I am your sole creditor. I hold the deed to your estate. I hold the absolute legal authority to execute the acceleration clause you so carelessly signed. Patricia let out a horrified, suffocating wail, finally comprehending the sheer scale of my strategic retaliation. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I took a deliberate step back, severing our connection forever. You made your choices, I stated, looking my parents dead in the eye with a cold, unrelenting stare. You have 30 days to vacate my property. Have fun living on the streets with your golden child. I turned on my heel and walked out of the terminal. I did not look back. I did not need to see the devastation on their faces, because their complete financial and social annihilation was already a mathematical certainty. Uncle Harrison and Devin walked right beside me, our synchronized footsteps echoing against the concrete floors of the port. We stepped out into the bright, blinding Miami sunlight, leaving the toxic remnants of my past locked securely behind those heavy frosted glass doors. 3 months later, the dust from that explosive morning had completely settled, revealing a radically different landscape. The justice system moves surprisingly fast when a major corporate entity hands federal investigators a flawlessly compiled 200-page forensic audit. Brad did not even make it to a trial. Facing an overwhelming mountain of irrefutable digital and financial evidence, his high-priced defense attorneys advised him to take a plea deal. He is currently serving a 72-month sentence in a minimum security federal correctional institution. The man who once bragged about luxury suites, expensive tailoring, and top-tier executive privileges now wears a standard-issue jumpsuit. He earns pennies an hour working in the prison laundry facility. His corporate reputation is entirely eradicated. He is permanently barred from ever holding a financial license or operating within the banking sector again. His arrogance led him directly into a concrete cell, and he has nobody to blame but his own staggering greed. Sydney. Patricia and Richard faced an equally brutal, agonizing reality. I kept my absolute promise and executed the aggressive acceleration clause on their second mortgage the precise second the 30-day grace period expired. I employed a ruthless property management firm to handle the formal eviction process. They were legally and unceremoniously removed from their sprawling, pristine estate. Because the federal government seized all remaining assets tied to the fraudulent shell company, they had absolutely no cash reserves to secure a new home. Their beloved country club permanently revoked their membership. Their wealthy social circle completely ostracized them, treating their public humiliating downfall like a highly contagious disease. They were forced to pack whatever meager belongings they could fit into Richard's aging sedan and relocate to a cramped rundown motel on the extreme undesirable outskirts of the city. Without the thick insulating layer of wealth to buffer their deeply toxic personalities, they immediately turned on each other like starved wolves. The cramped quarters of their cheap, damp motel room became a daily psychological battleground. According to the few mutual acquaintances who still answered their desperate phone calls, the environment is pure misery. Patricia constantly screams at Richard, blaming his profound financial incompetence for losing their status. Richard aggressively blames Sydney for destroying their comfortable retirement by carelessly demanding luxury she could not afford. Sydney spends her days crying on a stained mattress, furious that her parents can no longer fund her extravagant lifestyle or protect her from the consequences of her choices. The golden child finally shattered their illusion of a perfect family. They are drowning in a sea of insurmountable debt, suffocated by the exact same cruelty and selfishness they once so happily inflicted on me. They have absolutely nothing left but each other, which is arguably the most severe fitting punishment of all. While their world burned completely to the ground, my world flourished beyond my wildest expectations. I sold my parents' foreclosed estate to a commercial developer at a massive premium, instantly multiplying my personal net worth. I used a fraction of those profits to purchase a stunning modern penthouse overlooking the vibrant downtown skyline. The space is flooded with natural light, featuring clean architectural lines and expansive terraces. It is a home built on truth, unburdened by deception. Professionally, my career skyrocketed. The board of directors at Brad's former firm was so impressed by the airtight precision of my independent investigation that they offered me an incredibly lucrative consulting contract. My own firm promoted me to chief audit executive. My days are filled with genuine purpose, absolute clarity, and the profound peace of mind that comes from living a life built entirely on uncompromising integrity. Devin experienced a similar beautiful renaissance. He finalized his emergency at fault divorce with lethal, uncompromising efficiency. The judge enforced the strict infidelity clause of his prenuptial agreement without hesitation, protecting every single dollar of his premarital assets and his highly lucrative cybersecurity company. He sold his old house, shedding the last physical reminder of Sydney's toxic presence, and moved into a sleek, high-tech loft right in the city center. We speak almost every day. The shared trauma of our mutual betrayal forged a bond that goes far beyond traditional friendship. We became the family we both desperately needed, but never truly had. Uncle Harrison visits us frequently, proud of the empire we are both building. This evening, a warm, gentle breeze flows through the open glass doors of my new balcony. Devin is sitting across from me in a comfortable lounge chair holding a crystal glass of premium bourbon. I am holding a tall glass of vintage champagne. The city lights sparkle brilliantly below us, a sprawling sea of endless, vibrant possibility. The air feels remarkably light. There are no secrets hiding in the shadows. There are no manipulative relatives demanding sacrifices. There is only peace. We raise our glasses, clinking them together with a clear, resonant ring. We do not toast to revenge or bitterness. We toast to absolute freedom. We toast to the terrifying, beautiful courage required to completely sever the heavy chains holding us down and walk boldly into a brighter future. I step up to the edge of the balcony, resting my hands securely on the cool glass railing, and look directly outward. The hardest lesson I ever learned was accepting that the people supposed to love you the most are sometimes the exact people you need to protect yourself from. Family isn't blood, it's who protects you when the world burns. Have you ever had to cut off toxic roots to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below. The gripping story of Brenda's ultimate betrayal and subsequent triumph serves as a powerful testament to a harsh but necessary truth that blood alone does not define a true family. For generations, society has conditioned us to believe that we must unconditionally endure toxic behavior, financial exploitation, and emotional abuse simply because it comes from the people who raised us or share our DNA. However, this narrative completely shatters that dangerous illusion, proving that blind loyalty to a destructive family dynamic only paves the way to your own ruin. The most profound lesson embedded in this story is the absolute necessity of establishing unshakable boundaries and recognizing your own self-worth. When Brenda was faced with unimaginable betrayal, her husband emptying her life savings to fund a secret life with her own sister, all while her enabling parents demanded she sacrifice her home to protect their fragile social standing, she refused to collapse into the expected victim role. Instead, she chose to fiercely protect herself. She recognized that her parents and sister were not a safe harbor, but rather toxic anchors actively dragging her underwater. By shifting her perspective and treating their betrayal with cold, undeniable facts, rather than raw emotion, she reclaimed her narrative. She taught us that walking away from abusive relatives is not an act of cruelty or selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. True family is a conscious choice. It is built entirely on mutual respect, unwavering support in your darkest hours, and uncompromising integrity, much like the bond Brenda forged with Devon and Uncle Harrison. We must stop setting ourselves on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Take a moment today to reevaluate the boundaries in your own life and find the courage to cut off any toxic roots so you can finally flourish.